Welcome, listeners, to Anonna's creation. Today, we begin a journey into the shadows to rediscover a story you only think you know. We delve deep beneath the sunlit world of vibrant myths, past the feuding gods on their golden mountain, and into a realm of silent, solemn majesty. This is the story of its king, the one they call the Dark One, the Unforgiving, the Grim. This is the story of Hades, and the truth of the kingdom he was never meant to rule. The first thing Ethan remembered was the cold. Not the biting cold of a winter storm or the sharp chill of a mountain peak, but a deep, pervasive cold that seemed to seep into the very essence of what he used to be. His memories of life were like fading photographs, moments of warmth and color, a woman's laugh, the scent of summer rain, the rough texture of his father's work coat. Now, there was only a persistent gray fog and the gentle, rhythmic lapping of water. He stood on the bank of a river so vast its other side was lost in the gloom. The water wasn't blue or brown, but a flat, oily black, reflecting no light. A line of silent figures stretched beside him, their forms indistinct, shimmering like heat haze on a summer road. They were shades, the disembodied spirits of the dead, and Ethan, with a slow, dawning horror, realized he was one of them. There was no pain, no fear, just a profound and hollow emptiness. His end had been sudden. A flash of light, a concussive boom, the feeling of falling. He had been a firefighter in Chicago, running into a burning building that others were running from. A hero, they would call him. But heroism felt distant and meaningless here, on the edge of eternity. A shape emerged from the fog on the water. It was a skiff, ancient and weathered, propelled by a single tall figure cloaked in shadow. The ferryman, Sharon. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of timeless eons spent on this single task. His face, hidden deep within his cowl, was a roadmap of grim duty. As the boat scraped against the gravel shore, he extended a skeletal, waiting hand. Ethan fumbled in the pockets of a uniform he no longer wore, an instinct from a life he no longer had. Then he remembered. An old story his grandmother, a lover of myths, used to tell him. The price for passage. He felt a small, cold weight in the palm of his hand and looked down to see a single, tarnished silver coin. He didn't know how it got there. No one did. It was simply part of the transition, a final transactional farewell to the world of the living. He placed the coin in Karen's palm. The ferryman's fingers closed around it and he gave a curt, silent nod, gesturing for Ethan to board. The journey across the river Styx was unervingly silent. There was no wind, no birdsong, only the dip and pull of Karen's oar. The other shades on the boat were equally quiet, their faces blank canvases of resignation. They were leaving everything behind, and in this quiet passage they were becoming nothing but memories. Ethan looked back, but the shore from which they came had already been swallowed by the mist. There was only forward. When they finally reached the other side, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and final. The path led to a pair of colossal gates wrought from black, unearthly metal. They weren't adorned with skulls or monstrous figures as the stories suggested. Instead, they were intricately carved with images of sleeping figures, peaceful and serene. Standing guard wasn't a three-headed beast breathing fire, but a sense of immense, unyielding authority. The gates swung open on their own, not with a creak, but with a low, resonant hum like the final chord of a somber song. They entered a hall so vast it could have contained a mountain range. The ceiling was lost in darkness, but the space was illuminated by a soft, silver light that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself, veins of glowing minerals crisscrossing the polished obsidian floor. Thousands upon thousands of shades moved in silent, orderly lines, guided by stern-faced figures in dark armor. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't a pit of despair. It was a system, a bureaucracy of souls. The far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from a single piece of black diamond, sat the master of the realm. He was nothing like the monstrous devil Ethan had been taught to imagine. There were no horns, no pitchfork, no tail. The being on the throne was a king. He was tall and powerfully built, with skin that seemed pale in the silvery light. His hair was as black as a starless night, and his beard was neatly trimmed. He wore simple, elegant robes of the deepest black, adorned with silver thread that mirrored the veins in the floor. But it was his eyes that held all the power. They were the color of twilight, a deep, stormy gray that held the weight of ages. They saw everything, not with malice, but with an unnerving, absolute clarity. This was Hades. He wasn't watching the new arrivals with glee. His expression was one of profound seriousness, of a manager overseeing the most critical and thankless task in the cosmos. In his hands, he held not a weapon but a simple, unadorned scale. As Ethan's line moved forward, he could hear the king's voice for the first time. It was not a roar or a hiss. It was a deep, resonant baritone that filled the immense hall without effort. It was a voice of command, but laced with a strange, undeniable weariness. "Marcus Thorne," Hades said, his eyes fixed on the shade standing before the throne. A scroll materialized in his hand. "Banker, you moved wealth that wasn't yours. You impoverished thousands to enrich yourself. Your life was a monument to greed." His voice was not angry but factual, a statement of cosmic record. He gestured to his left. "The fields of Asphodel. Walk there and contemplate a life of mediocrity. You were neither good enough for Elysium nor wicked enough for the depths of Tartarus. You were simply empty." The shade of Marcus Thorne drifted away, its form already seeming less distinct. Hades sighed, a sound so quiet it was almost imperceptible. He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, his gaze swept across the hall, across the countless souls waiting for his judgment. Ethan saw it then. Not cruelty, not evil. He saw loneliness. He saw the crushing burden of a sovereign who ruled a kingdom of endings, a place no one ever chose to visit. His brothers had drawn lots for the spoils of their father's conquered kingdom. Zeus, the charismatic, had taken the dazzling, sun-drenched sky. Poseidon, the temperamental, had claimed the wild, churning seas. And Hades, the eldest, the most dutiful, had been left with the dark, the deep, the end of all things. The Underworld. He hadn't chosen it. It was his assigned post. And he performed his duty with a relentless, thankless justice that the mortals above, in their fear of the inevitable, had twisted into a story of villainy. They painted him as a monster for presiding over the one thing that was certain for them all. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. He stepped forward, standing before the obsidian throne. The full weight of the king's gaze fell upon him. Those twilight eyes seemed to strip away everything, his name, his job, his life, and see only the core of his soul, the choices he had made, the man he had been. "Ethan Carter," Hades spoke, his voice echoing in the silent hall. The scroll appeared in his hand, its surface glowing with the faint, silvery script of a life lived. "Firefighter." You ran towards the fire. Hades leaned forward slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his ancient eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to interest. A break in the unending monotony of human failing. "They tell stories about me up there," the king of the underworld said, his voice a low murmur. "They say I am a thief of life, a harbinger of sorrow. They are wrong. I am not the cause of the ending, Ethan Carter. I am merely the librarian of it. I keep the records. I maintain the balance. Now let us read your story together and see where you belong." The silence in the great hall was absolute, a pressure against the ears. Ethan stood before the throne, a single, insignificant point of light in an ocean of shadow. King of the underworld, Hades, held the glowing scroll that was the sum of his existence. Ethan expected a trial, a list of his sins read aloud for all to hear. He expected condemnation or perhaps cold, procedural damnation. He did not expect what came next. Hades did not read from the scroll. Instead, he rested a single pale finger on the ethereal parchment. The moment his skin made contact, the hall around Ethan dissolved. He was no longer in the obsidian court of the dead, but standing on a sun-drenched sidewalk in his old neighborhood. He was a boy again, no older than 8, clutching a half-eaten chocolate bar. A younger girl, Sarah from next door, was crying on her porch steps, her own candy bar lying melted and ruined on the hot pavement. Ethan felt the ghost of his younger self's desire to keep his treat, the simple, powerful greed of a child. But then another feeling washed over him, stronger and clearer, empathy. He saw her sadness and felt it as his own. He walked over, broke his own chocolate bar in two, and handed her the larger piece. The memory was fleeting, insignificant in the grand tapestry of a life, but in this space it was vivid and real. The girl's watery smile felt as warm as the summer sun. Then, just as quickly, the scene vanished. He was back in the Hall of Judgment. Hades's finger was still on the scroll. King's stormy gray eyes held a neutral, assessing expression. "A small choice," Hades's voice rumbled, soft yet clear. an instinct to soothe another's sorrow over indulging your own desire. Most souls I see here have long forgotten such an impulse. It is the first weight on the scale. He shifted his finger, and the world dissolved again. This time it was a dark, rain-slicked highway at night. Ethan was 20 at the wheel of his first car, driving too fast. The memory was sharp with the scent of cheap air freshener and wet asphalt. A heated argument with his father echoed in his mind, the angry words still hanging in the air. He was reckless, fueled by pride and a desperate need to prove a point that no longer mattered. For a horrifying second, the car hydroplaned, spinning towards an embankment. He wrestled with the wheel, his heart hammering in his chest, and managed to bring it to a screeching halt just inches from disaster. The memory was filled with the sour taste of fear and the bitter tang of regret. He had been stupid, arrogant. He could have died or worse, hurt someone else. The shame of it was as real now as it was then. When he returned to the hall, Hades's expression had not changed. "Fear," the god stated, his voice a flat analytical tone, "and the wisdom that follows it. You learned humility from your arrogance. You learned control from your recklessness. Many souls bring me arrogance, Ethan Carter. Few bring the lesson learned from it. This too has weight." Hades paused, his gaze lifting from the scroll to meet Ethan's directly. "The living imagine my realm as a place of punishment. They think I revel in damnation and torture. But Tartarus is reserved for the architects of suffering, for those whose souls are so blackened by malice they would unravel the fabric of existence itself. It is a place I rarely have to populate, thankfully. Most souls are not monstrous. They are simply adrift." He gestured to the endless, silent lines of shades. "The vast majority are destined for the fields of asphodel. They lived lives of quiet neutrality. They were not cruel, but they were not kind. They did not steal, but they did not give. They took up space in the world, and now they take up space here. An eternity of gray, formless wandering, to reflect a life that lacked true color. It is not a punishment. It is a perfect, dispassionate reflection of what they were." His finger moved one last time on the scroll. Fire. Roaring, blinding, all-consuming fire. Ethan was back in the building, the heat so intense it felt like his skin was melting. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at his lungs. His protective gear was failing. Every instinct, every nerve ending screamed at him to retreat, to save himself. The building groaned around him, the sound of a dying beast. He could hear his captain's frantic voice crackling over the radio, ordering all units to evacuate. But he could also hear something else. A child's terrified whimper, coming from a room down the collapsing hallway. The memory wasn't a narrative, it was a storm of sensation. The searing heat, the choking smoke, the crushing weight of fear, and then, cutting through it all, a single defiant choice. He ignored the order. He ignored the instinct for self-preservation. He moved toward the sound. He found a little girl huddled in a closet, her face streaked with soot and tears. He remembered the feeling of lifting her into his arms, of shielding her small body with his own as a ceiling beam crashed down behind them. He remembered the brief, blinding flash of a window exploding outwards. His last conscious thought not of himself, but of whether the child would be safe. The vision faded, leaving Ethan standing before the throne, the echo of his sacrifice still vibrating through his very essence. Hades slowly lifted his finger from the scroll, which dissolved into silver dust. The scales in his other hand, which had been perfectly balanced, now dipped heavily to one side. King of the Underworld looked at Ethan, and for the first time there was something other than judgment in his eyes. It was a deep, ancient respect. "Self-sacrifice," Hades said, and his voice held a note of finality. "The choice to place another's existence above your own, not for glory nor for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. It is the rarest and most valuable currency in the cosmos. Far more precious than the gold your living kings hoard, or the power my brother Zeus wields so carelessly." He rose from his throne, a towering figure of silent authority. "Your life was not long, Ethan Carter. But a life is not measured in years. It is measured in moments like those. In the weight of its choices." He raised a hand, and a figure emerged from the shadows at the side of the hall. It was a being cloaked in twilight, with a gentle face and kind eyes. Not a fearsome demon, but a calm and steady guide. "Your place is not in the gray fields of asphodel," Hades declared. "You have earned your rest. You are bound for Elysium, the Isles of the Blessed. A reward for a life of virtue. The guide beckoned to Ethan. It was time to go. Ethan looked one last time at the grim, solitary god on the black diamond throne. He had been judged, not by a monster, but by the most just and discerning ruler he could imagine. He saw a being bound by an eternal, lonely duty, a king who brought order to the chaos of endings. As Ethan turned to follow his guide away from the Great Hall, he heard Hades' voice one final time, not as a king addressing a subject, but as one weary soul speaking to another. Go, Ethan Carter. Find your peace. The world of the living may have forgotten the meaning of true heroism, but we do not forget it here. As Ethan turned from the throne, the silent guide, Hypnos, gave a gentle nod. There were no words exchanged. None were needed. The guide's presence was a calming balm, a quiet assurance that the judgment was over and a new path had begun. They walked away from the Great Hall, the resonant sound of Hades' voice fading behind them, replaced by a profound and all-encompassing silence. Colossal gates hummed open to let them pass, and they stepped out into the true expanse of the Underworld. The landscape that unfolded before Ethan was one of muted, monochromatic beauty. A vast, rolling plain stretched to a horizon that never seemed to get any closer, all under a permanent, starless twilight sky. The air was still and cool, carrying no scent, no hint of decay or life. It was the smell of absolute neutrality. They walked along a path of dark, smooth stones that seemed to absorb all sound. To their right, Ethan saw it, the fields of asphodel. It was an endless meadow, not of green grass, but of a pale, ghostly gray. The flowers that gave the fields their name grew in dense clusters, their petals the color of ash, their stems slender and weak. And among them, the shades wandered. There were millions of them, a sea of listless figures drifting without aim or purpose. They did not speak to one another. Their faces, once capable of expressing the entire spectrum of human emotion, were now placid and blank. They were the souls Hades had spoken of, the bankers, the middle managers, the indifferent neighbors, the people who had lived without passion, kindness, or cruelty. They had simply existed, and now they simply continued to. Do they remember? Ethan asked, his voice sounding shockingly loud in the stillness. Hypnos, the guide, did not turn his head, but his voice was soft, like the rustling of dry leaves. Flickers. Echoes. Like a half-remembered dream upon waking. They remember they had a name, but not what it was. They recall the feeling of love, but not who they loved. It is a mercy. To have a full memory of a vibrant life in a place of such quietude would be an exquisite torture. So they are unburdened of it. A profound sadness washed over Ethan. This, he realized, was a fate far more chilling than any fiery pit. It was the complete and utter erosion of self, the final consequence of an unexamined life. His heroic death felt less like a tragedy and more like a profound blessing, a final, definitive act that had saved him from this eternal grayness. As they continued, the path began to descend. The air grew colder, and a low, dissonant hum vibrated up through the soles of Ethan's feet. To their left, the ground fell away into a chasm of pure, impenetrable darkness. It was a wound in the fabric of the cosmos, a void that seemed to drink the silvery light from the air. Tartarus, Hypnos said, his calm voice now holding a note of solemnity. Ethan edged closer, peering into the abyss. There were no flames, no screams of agony as the mortal myths described. The horror of Tartarus was far more subtle and absolute. From its depths rose not sounds, but the psychic residue of monumental evil. He felt waves of cold, calculating cruelty, the echo of genocides, the chilling satisfaction of torturers, the bottomless avarice of kings who had starved their own people. It was the collected spiritual filth of millennia, a prison for souls so toxic they could not be allowed to dissipate. The king does not delight in this place, Hypnos continued, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. He sees it as a necessary containment. Cosmic quarantine. Some souls are not merely broken, they are a sickness. Here they are isolated, left to confront the gravity of their own choices for eternity, so they cannot infect the rest of creation. There was an iron logic to it that Ethan couldn't deny. Hades wasn't a torturer. He was a warden, a physician of the soul, isolating a plague so the universe could remain healthy. It was yet another grim, thankless task he performed in the shadows, while his brother Zeus held court in the sun, oblivious to the darkness being held at bay. They walked on, leaving the unsettling vibrations of Tartarus behind. path began to climb again, leading them toward a gentle, murmuring sound. Soon they came to the bank of another river. Unlike the oily blackness of the Styx, this water was crystal clear, shimmering with a soft internal light. It flowed slowly, peacefully, and the sound of its current was a soothing lullaby. "The River Lethe," Hypnos announced. "The waters of oblivion." A small, simple ferry was moored to the bank, empty and waiting. "All who would enter Elysium must first drink," the guide explained. "The pains of your mortal life, your regrets, your fears, the grief of your own passing, they are heavy burdens. Lethe washes them away, leaving only the purity of joy and peace. It allows you to enter your final rest whole, unburdened by the sorrows of the past." Ethan hesitated. Forget? He thought of the woman he had loved, the pride on his father's face, the camaraderie of his fellow firefighters. Were those not worth the pain that came with their memory? As if sensing his thoughts, Hypnos clarified. "It does not erase who you were, Ethan Carter. Love is not a sorrow. Pride in a life well lived is not a burden. The water is wise. It washes away the wound, but leaves the memory of the warmth that caused it. You will not forget those you loved. You will simply forget the pain of having lost them." That Ethan understood. It was the final, greatest mercy of the Underworld. He knelt by the riverbank, cupped his hands, and brought the cool, clean water to his lips. It had no taste, but as he drank, he felt a profound sense of release. The grief over his own short life, the lingering sting of his final moments, the deep ache of leaving his loved ones behind, all of it gently dissolved like mist in the morning sun. What remained was the love itself, distilled and pure, a warm, glowing ember in the core of his being. He stood up, feeling lighter than he had since he'd arrived. He felt peaceful. Across the river, the landscape was different. The perpetual twilight gave way to a soft, golden glow. He could see lush green fields, groves of impossibly tall trees, and hear the faint, distant sound of music and laughter. "Welcome," Hypnos said, a faint smile gracing his lips for the first time, "to the shores of Elysium." They stepped onto the ferry, which began to move on its own, gliding silently across the water of forgetfulness, leaving the gray plains and dark chasms of the Underworld behind. Ethan was heading toward his reward, a paradise earned through sacrifice. Yet he found himself looking back one last time, toward the distant dark heart of the realm, where a solitary king sat on a throne of judgment, forever bound to the shadows so that souls like his could find the light. The moment Ethan stepped off the ferry, the very nature of existence seemed to shift. Cool, neutral air of the Underworld was replaced by a gentle, warm breeze that carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and freshly turned earth. The perpetual twilight gave way to a soft, golden radiance, as if the world was bathed in the light of an eternal, perfect sunset. The silence was gone, replaced by the distant, melodic sound of a harp, the gentle murmur of thoughtful conversation, and the sound of joyous, uninhibited laughter. Hypnos, his duty complete, gave Ethan a final serene nod before his form seemed to dissolve back into the peaceful shadows, returning to his master's realm. Ethan was left standing alone at the edge of a meadow so vibrant it almost hurt his eyes. The grass was a deep, impossible green, and it was dotted with flowers that glowed with a soft, internal light. A crystal-clear stream gurgled nearby, its banks lined with weeping willows whose leaves shimmered like spun silver. This was Elysium. It was more beautiful than any mortal artist's depiction of heaven, more peaceful than any poet's dream of paradise. As he walked into the meadow, he saw other souls. They were not wandering aimlessly like the shades in Asphodel. They moved with purpose and contentment. A small group sat under an olive tree, engaged in a quiet but animated debate, their spectral forms leaning in with interest. A lone figure stood by the stream, painting the landscape onto a canvas of pure light, his brushstrokes creating colors Ethan had never seen before. A man and a woman danced slowly in a clearing, their movements perfectly in sync, their faces alight with a love that had clearly transcended lifetimes. These were the heroes, the virtuous, the best of humanity. Ethan realized quickly that heroism here was not defined merely by acts of battlefield valor. He saw a woman he instinctively knew had been a doctor, one who had spent her life healing the sick in impoverished nations. He saw a man who had been a teacher, whose patient dedication had shaped thousands of young minds. They were all here, their souls radiating a quiet, powerful light. It can be a bit overwhelming at first, can't it? The voice was female, warm and resonant, with an undercurrent of authority that was impossible to ignore. Ethan turned to see a woman standing beside him. She appeared to be in her later years, with silver hair tied back in a simple, practical bun. Her eyes were a piercing blue, filled with a sharp intelligence and a deep, settled calm that spoke of countless challenges met and overcome. She wore the simple, flowing robes common to this place, but she stood with the straight-backed posture of a lifelong soldier. "I'm Eva," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm and reassuring. "General Eva Rostova, once upon a time. And you're the new arrival. The firefighter." Word travels fast here, even without mouths to speak it. "Ethan Carter," he replied, feeling a bit starstruck. "It's more than I ever imagined." "It always is," Eva said with a soft smile, her gaze sweeping across the idyllic fields. "There is no pain here, Ethan. No hunger, no fear, no grief. The waters of Lethe have seen to that. You can spend your days in quiet contemplation or debate philosophy with Plato himself. You can listen to Mozart compose a new symphony, or you can simply sit by the stream and remember the warmth of the sun on your face during your favorite mortal afternoon. It is an eternity of peace." They began to walk together, strolling aimlessly along the glowing riverbank. "It's not just rest, is it?" Ethan asked, watching the artist capture the sunset on his canvas of light. "They're still doing things. Creating." "Of course," Eva affirmed. "The best parts of the human spirit don't simply vanish. The passion, the curiosity, the drive to create and understand, that is the essence of a virtuous soul. Here, you are free to pursue those passions without the burdens of mortal life. No deadlines, no bills, no aging bodies that fail you. Just the pure act of being your best self." It was a perfect concept, a flawless reward. And yet, as Ethan looked at the serene, untroubled faces of the Elysian residents, he felt a strange, unidentifiable emotion. It was Eva who gave it a name. "It is a perfect reward," she said, as if reading his mind. "And we are all eternally grateful for it. But we are also aware that our peace comes at a price." She stopped walking and turned to look back in the direction from which Ethan had come, back toward the unseen heart of the underworld. The golden light of Elysium seemed to fall short of her gaze, which was fixed on a distant, imagined darkness. "We are the success stories," she continued, her voice lowering slightly. "The souls who made it. But this paradise, this perfect ending, is built upon a foundation of absolute, unyielding order. An order maintained by one who can never rest. One who can never know this peace." Ethan knew instantly she was talking about Hades. "We see only the best of souls here," Eva explained. "He sees them all. The greedy, the cruel, the petty, the monstrous. Day after day, for eons, he sits on that throne and absorbs the spiritual weight of all the world's failings. He judges, he sorts, he contains the darkness so that this light can exist." Her words painted a picture in Ethan's mind. He imagined Hades on his throne, a solitary dam holding back an infinite ocean of mediocrity and malice. He recalled the profound weariness in the god's eyes, the immense burden of his duty. The residents of Elysium had earned their rest. Hades, by the simple lottery of his birth, had been denied his forever. "The stories the mortals tell, they call him a villain," Ethan said quietly. Eva let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mortals fear what they cannot understand, and they understand nothing so little as death. They need a monster to blame for their own endings. It is easier than accepting that life is finite. They paint our king as a jailer, when in truth, he is the most diligent and solitary of shepherds, guiding every last soul to its rightful place. There is no one in all the cosmos, not even his brother on Olympus, who carries a heavier burden." Ethan looked out over the perfect fields of Elysium, at the souls enjoying their well-earned eternal peace. He was one of them now. He was safe. He was home. But for the first time, he understood that paradise wasn't free. Its price was the eternal, lonely vigil of its misunderstood king. And that knowledge, even in this place of perfect joy, added a new, somber shade to the golden light. Time in Elysium did not pass in the traditional sense. There was no sun to rise or set, no moon to mark the nights. There were only cycles of peaceful activity and serene contemplation, all bathed in the eternal golden glow. Ethan settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than breathing had in his mortal life. He spent what might have been mornings discussing the nature of courage with a stoic Roman centurion and a quiet, unassuming woman who had been a civil rights activist. Afternoons were for listening to a long-dead composer create music that could make the very stars weep. or for walking through groves of silver-leaf trees with Eva Rostova, learning the intricate histories of the heroes who called this paradise home. He could, if he chose, revisit his own life. He could stand in his childhood kitchen, smelling his mother's baking, or feel the rush of pride from his graduation day at the Fire Academy. The waters of Lethe had washed away the pain of loss, leaving only the pure, golden essence of the memories themselves. It was a perfect existence, a flawless tapestry of peace and contentment. And then one day, the tapestry developed a snag. Ethan was sitting with Eva by the crystal stream, listening to her describe a particularly cunning military strategy from a forgotten war. In the middle of her sentence, a faint, discordant hum vibrated through the air. It was barely perceptible, like a single off-key string on a celestial harp. The golden light of Elysium seemed to flicker for a nanosecond, and a wave of something cold and unfamiliar washed through the meadow. It was gone as quickly as it came. Ethan frowned. "Did you feel that?" Eva's narrative had stopped mid-word. The warm, serene expression on her face was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, analytical concern. Her piercing blue eyes scanned the horizon, as if searching for a distant enemy. "I did," she said, her voice low and serious. The moment passed. The music swelled again, the gentle laughter of other souls returned, and the golden light was as steady as ever. Most residents seemed not to have noticed, or if they did, they dismissed it as a fleeting anomaly. But Ethan, still relatively new to the perfect harmony of this place, couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The coldness had felt wrong. It was an echo of the mortal world's fear, a feeling that had no place here. It happened again a cycle later. This time it was stronger. A palpable tremor ran through the ground, and the sweet scent of jasmine was momentarily replaced by a phantom smell of stagnant water and decay. A philosopher mid-sentence lost his train of thought. An artist's hand slipped, smearing his canvas of light. This time, more people noticed. A worried murmur rippled through the usually tranquil community. "This is not normal," Ethan stated, looking to Eva for an explanation. "No, it is not," she confirmed, her posture rigid, betraying the general she had once been. "Elysium is insulated. It is the most protected, most stable plane in all of existence. Its very foundation is the perfect balance of the souls within it. For that balance to be disturbed, even for a moment, the source of the disruption must be immense." They gathered with a few of the other elder souls, the Roman centurion, the activist, the wise doctor. They stood on a gentle rise that overlooked the vast fields, their faces etched with a gravity that Elysium was never meant to know. "These are psychic aftershocks," said the doctor, a woman named Anonna whose mortal life had been spent studying the human mind. "They are ripples of a great disturbance. Elysium is the calmest bay in the cosmic ocean. For us to feel waves like this, the storm at sea must be a hurricane." "The storm is in our king's realm," Eva added, her gaze fixed on the invisible border that separated their paradise from the rest of the underworld. "Something is happening in the deeper spheres. Something is straining the very laws that govern this kingdom." Speculation began to fly. Had a soul of immense power escaped from Tartarus? Was there a rebellion among the gray, listless shades of Asphodel? Or, as the centurion grimly suggested, was the disturbance coming from outside? From one of Hades's famously temperamental brothers? "Poseidon's rages can shake the foundations of the earth," he mused, "and Zeus's whims have been known to unravel the fates themselves. They have always been jealous of this kingdom's sheer size, its unassailable population." The thought was chilling. Hades ruled his own domain with absolute authority, but he was still one of 3 brothers. The thought of a war between the gods, a conflict that could shatter the very firmament of reality, sent a new kind of fear through Ethan. It wasn't the fear of death, that was long past. It was the fear of annihilation, of his hard-won peace being torn apart by a cosmic squabble he couldn't comprehend. The final proof that their fears were warranted came without warning. Ethan was walking by the river of memory when the water, usually so clear it reflected the golden light in dazzling fractals, suddenly clouded over. A murky, gray sludge, the color of the asphodel fields, bled into the pristine current, swirled like a spreading stain before slowly, miraculously clearing again. But the damage was done. The illusion of inviolable perfection was shattered. At the same time, a cold wind swept through the idyllic groves. It was a wind that did not belong here, carrying the scent of mortal sorrow and the metallic tang of shed blood. It rustled the silver leaves of the willows, making a sound not like music, but like a weary, mournful sigh. Panic, a long-forgotten and unwelcome emotion, began to prickle at the edges of the collective consciousness. The souls of Elysium looked around, their eternal peace fractured by a creeping, invasive dread. Ethan stood beside Eva on the hill, watching the last of the grayness fade from the river. The serenity of his reward now felt fragile, conditional. He finally, truly understood what Eva had meant. Their paradise was not a self-sustaining reality. It was a protected garden, and the walls were maintained by one solitary, burdened king. And now, for the first time in millennia, it seemed the walls were beginning to crack. The whispers in paradise had become a clear and terrifying warning. Their guardian was in trouble. Peace of Elysium was shattered. The golden light, once a source of comfort, now seemed thin and fragile, a gilded veneer over a deep and growing unease. The eternal music had ceased, replaced by the hushed, worried whispers of souls who had forgotten the meaning of fear. They gathered in small, anxious clusters, their eyes repeatedly drawn to the clouded river or the groves where the cold wind still seemed to linger. They were in paradise, but for the first time it felt like a prison, for they were powerless to stop the encroaching dread. Ethan stood with Eva on the rise, alongside the Roman centurion Marcus and the wise doctor Anonna. They had become an informal council, the others looking to them for answers they didn't have. Eva's face was a mask of grim analysis, her mind clearly sifting through centuries of strategic knowledge, searching for a precedent that didn't exist. "This is not a natural decay," she said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the murmurs. "This is an attack. Not with swords and spears, but an attack on the very concept of order. A poison spreading through the roots of this realm." As she spoke, a profound silence fell over the fields. It was not the peaceful quiet of before, but a sudden, heavy blanket of absolute stillness. Every soul, every shimmering leaf, every blade of glowing grass froze. From the center of the main plaza, a shadow began to coalesce. It did not spread from the ground but seemed to form from the air itself, a patch of night in the eternal sunset. From this void of darkness stepped a figure. He was not a monster nor a wraith. He was tall and sculpted like a marble statue, with skin the color of pale moonlight. He was clad in simple, dark armor that seemed to absorb the light around it. Two immense wings, the color and texture of a raven's feather, were folded neatly against his back. His face was unervingly beautiful, but devoid of all emotion. His presence radiated a coldness that was not hostile but absolute, the cold of a starless void, the final peaceful chill of an existence come to its end. It was Thanatos, the personification of death itself. Not the grim reaper of mortal myth, but the ancient, solemn ferryman of finality. He was a being who never ever entered Elysium. His work was done long before a soul reached these shores. His appearance here was a cataclysmic breach of protocol. He moved with a silent grace, his feet making no sound on the glowing grass. He stopped before Eva's small group on the hill, and though he did not speak, his voice entered the minds of every soul in Elysium, a voice that was not a sound but a pure, indisputable concept. The balance falters. The laws are being unwritten. Thanatos' gaze, empty of all but ancient duty, swept over them. The flow of souls has become a torrent, overwhelming the banks of the Styx. The shades in Asphodel, once placid, are stirring, agitated by a false whisper of escape. The gates of Tartarus strain against an unseen pressure. The great king, the master of this domain, is besieged not by an army, but by a pervasive, insidious chaos. A collective gasp, a psychic shockwave went through the assembled heroes. This was worse than they had imagined. It wasn't just a crack in the wall, the entire foundation was under assault. Thanatos' attention settled first on Eva. "Your mind has weighed the strategies of empires, General Rostova. You understand order and the cost of its absence. Your counsel is needed." Then his gaze shifted to Ethan. "You, Ethan Carter, are the newest among the blessed. Your sacrifice is still a fresh wound on the memory of the world." King noted the clarity of your soul. Your perspective, untempered by eons of peace, is required. Finally, he addressed all of them, every hero and virtuous soul from every age of man. King does not command you. Your service is done. Your rest is earned and guaranteed by the most ancient of laws. You are under no obligation. But he asks for volunteers. He asks for heroes to once again act as heroes. He asks you to leave this paradise willingly, to journey back to the heart of the shadow, and to stand with him against the unraveling. For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. The offer was unthinkable. To leave Elysium? To forsake an eternity of peace and willingly return to the gloom and uncertainty of the greater underworld? It was a sacrifice beyond reckoning. Eva Rostova was the first to step forward. She did not hesitate for a second. The general within her had never truly been put to rest. She inclined her head to Thanatos with a crisp, respectful nod. "My king guaranteed our peace," she said, her voice ringing with renewed purpose. "I will not stand idle while his kingdom is threatened. I will serve." The Roman centurion Marcus drew himself up to his full height and stepped beside her. A soldier's duty does not end when the battle is won. It ends when there are no more threats to the peace. "I will serve." Anonna the doctor followed. "My life was spent mending what was broken. Seems my work is not yet done. I will serve." All eyes turned to Ethan. He thought of the perfect golden peace. He thought of seeing his family again in flawless, painless memories. He could stay. No one would fault him. But then he remembered the look in Hades's eyes, not of a tyrant, but of a profoundly burdened sovereign. He remembered the feeling of the little girl's arms around his neck as he carried her from the fire. Heroism, he realized, wasn't a transaction that you traded for a reward. It was who you were. "I will serve," Ethan said, his voice steady. Thanatos gave a single, slow nod. A small group of others, inspired by their courage, stepped forward as well, a dozen souls in all, the bravest of the brave. "Follow me," the voice of death resonated in their minds. Thanatos turned and led the small band of volunteers away from the stunned crowds. He led them back to the shore where the ferry waited, the one that had brought Ethan to this paradise. This time, as they approached the waters of Lethe, Thanatos raised a hand. "Do not drink. You will need your memories. You will need your pain, your triumphs, your failures. You will need everything you were to face what is to come." Stepping onto the boat, Ethan looked back one last time at the golden fields of Elysium. He was leaving heaven. He was voluntarily sailing back toward the darkness, toward a crisis he could not fathom. The ferry pulled away from the shore, and as the scent of jasmine faded, replaced by the cool, neutral air of the underworld, he felt no regret. He only felt the familiar, heavy, and strangely comforting weight of purpose. Stepping off the ferry was like plunging into a cold bath. The warmth and golden light of Elysium vanished, instantly replaced by the familiar, oppressive gloom of the underworld. The air was heavy and still, the silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. For the other heroes who had spent centuries or even millennia in paradise, the transition was a jarring shock. For Ethan, it was a grim homecoming. He remembered this shore, the feeling of hollow confusion, the terror of the unknown. But this time was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp sense of purpose. He had his memories, his identity, and a mission. Thanatos led their small, determined group along the same dark stone path Ethan had walked with Hypnos. But the landscape was no longer one of quiet, monochromatic majesty. It was a realm on the edge of chaos. To their right, the fields of Asphodel were in turmoil. The last time Ethan had seen them, the millions of shades were drifting in a state of placid, listless resignation. Now they were agitated. A low, collective murmur, like the buzzing of a billion insects, rose from the gray meadows. The shades were no longer wandering aimlessly. They were gathering in vast, trembling throngs, pressing against the invisible boundaries of their domain. Their blank faces were now etched with a disturbing new emotion, a desperate, hungry wanting. The false whisper of escape had taken root, and it was turning the fields of apathy into a breeding ground for rebellion. Their path then took them along the banks of the river Styx. The river, once a flat, oily black mirror, was now a churning, violent torrent. Gray, frothing waves crashed against the shore, and the fog above the water writhed as if in agony. In the distance, they saw the skeletal figure of Charon, the ferryman, his skiff struggling against the current. His boat was dangerously overloaded with a frantic crowd of the newly dead, who, instead of accepting their fate with quiet dignity, were crying out in confusion and terror. The entire orderly process of the afterlife, a system that had functioned for eons, was grinding to a halt. As they approached the Great Hall, the sense of wrongness intensified. A chaotic energy pulsed from the colossal gates. Inside, the scene was one of barely controlled pandemonium. The solemn, orderly cues were gone. Thousands of souls milled about the obsidian floor, their forms flickering with anxiety. Stern-faced guardians, the ancient sentinels of the underworld, moved through the crowds, their dark armor clanking as they tried to impose an order that was rapidly dissolving. And on the throne, the epicenter of it all, sat Hades. He was no longer the picture of grim, weary detachment. He was a king under siege. He sat bolt upright, his hands gripping the arms of his black diamond thrown so tightly his knuckles were white. The air around him crackled with contained power. The scales of justice, which he normally held with a steady hand, now trembled, their balance shifting erratically. He was no longer just judging souls. He was actively projecting his will across his entire domain, a single monumental effort to keep his kingdom from tearing itself apart. His stormy gray eyes burned with a cold, furious fire. Thanatos led the volunteers from Elysium through the chaos, the lesser shades parting before the embodiment of death. They came to a stop at the foot of the throne. Hades' gaze fell upon them, and for a moment the immense pressure he was exerting seemed to lessen. A flicker of something grimly appreciative crossed his face. "You came," his voice was a low growl, strained with effort but still commanding the cavernous hall. "It is a testament to your character that you would trade paradise for a war room. I wish the circumstances of your return were more pleasant." "We came to serve my king," Eva Rostova said, her voice steady and clear. "Tell us what we are fighting." Hades' eyes narrowed, looking past them, past the walls of his hall, to the source of his troubles. "You are fighting a lie," he said, the words sharp with contempt. "A psychic poison has been unleashed into my realm. A voice. It whispers to the dead, preying on their mortal regrets. Promises them what is impossible, a return, a second chance at life, an escape from the consequences of their choices." "Who is responsible?" Then asked, stepping forward. "I do not know its name," Hades admitted, a fact that was itself terrifying. "It is a power from outside the established order. Feels ancient, something born of the raw, unstructured chaos that existed before the cosmos was given laws. Seeks to unravel my work, to unwrite the very concept of a final end. Death is no longer absolute, then life has no meaning, and the entire universe will collapse into an endless, screaming pandemonium." He leaned forward, the strain on his face immense. "I am the law in this place. My servants, Thanatos, the Furies, the Guardians, we are the system. We can reinforce the boundaries, but we cannot fight an idea. This poison is made of mortal hope, mortal regret. These are concepts alien to us. But not to you." His gaze settled on each of them in turn. "Eva, you are a strategist. You can see the shape of this conceptual battlefield. Marcus, you know discipline and can teach it to souls lost to chaos. Anonna, you understand the psyche, the very thing under attack. And Ethan," he looked at the firefighter, "you embody the truth that counteracts the lie. The voice offers a selfish escape. You chose a selfless end. Your very presence here is a weapon against it." He raised a hand and pointed toward the chaotic fields visible through the great gates. "The whisper is not uniform. It has found a focal point in the fields of asphodel. A soul, perhaps one with a particularly deep regret, has become a psychic amplifier, a beacon broadcasting this poison to the others. The whispers coalesce around it. That is your first mission. Go into the fields," Hades commanded, his voice regaining its full, resonant power. "Find this beacon. Confront it. Sever its connection to the voice. You must remind the dead that there is honor and peace in accepting one's end. Go. Bring order back to the heart of my kingdom, so that I may find the weed's source and burn it out." Leaving the relative security of Hades' hall was like stepping from a fortress into the heart of a riot. The four heroes, Ethan, Eva, Marcus, and Anonna, stood at the edge of the fields of asphodel, a small island of order in an ocean of rising chaos. The air, once still and neutral, was now thick with a palpable static, the collective psychic hum of millions of agitated souls. It was a sound that was felt more than heard, a low-frequency vibration that set one's teeth on edge. The vast gray meadows, which had once been a symbol of melancholic peace, now felt like a battlefield. The pale, ash-colored flowers trembled, not from any wind, but from the sheer emotional turmoil radiating from the countless shades. "They're not moving at random," Eva Rostova observed, her general's eyes scanning the vast, swirling throngs of spirits. She pointed to the east. There's a current, a psychic tide. They are being drawn towards something. We don't need a map. We just need to march into the heart of the storm. Marcus, the stoic Roman centurion, took his place at the front of their small formation. Stay close. Whatever this whisper is, it thrives on disorder. We will meet it with discipline. As they stepped into the fields, the assault began. It wasn't physical. It was something far more insidious. The moment they were among the shades, they were bombarded by waves of raw, undiluted regret. It was the collected sorrow of a million unremarkable lives, a tsunami of what-ifs and if-onlys. Ethan staggered as he was hit by the crushing weight of 1,000 lonely deaths, old men who had died alone in sterile hospital rooms, their last thoughts of children who never visited. He felt the sharp, bitter regret of words left unsaid, of apologies never offered, of love never confessed. It was a suffocating miasma of human failure. Beside him, Eva gritted her teeth, her face pale. As a general, she had sent thousands to their deaths. Now, the psychic echoes of every soldier she had ever lost, every tactical miscalculation, every civilian casualty washed over her. It was a burden she had made peace with eons ago, but the raw emotion of it still had the power to sting. It's personalized, Anonna, the doctor, said, her voice tight with concentration as she analyzed the phenomenon. It finds the cracks in your soul and pours poison into them. It's a venom made of memory. As they pushed deeper, the shades began to notice them. In this world of gray, indistinct spirits, the heroes blazed like 4 bright flames. They were whole, complete, their memories intact, their sense of self absolute. The agitated shades, driven mad by the promise of reclaiming their own lost identities, saw the heroes' wholeness as something to be consumed. They began to press in, their ghostly forms converging on the small group. Their touch was cold, and with it came a direct, focused assault of despair. A shade that had been a neglectful father brushed against Marcus, and the centurion flinched as if struck, hit by a lifetime of a stranger's parental guilt. "Hold formation," Marcus bellowed, his voice a rock of certainty in the swirling chaos. His own disciplined mind, honed by decades of Roman legionary life, was a shield that helped protect the others. "Do not let their sorrow become your own. We are not them." They fought their way forward, meter by painful meter, their shared purpose acting as a beacon. Eva guided them, navigating the psychic currents, while Marcus kept their guard up and Anonna helped them identify and deflect the worst of the emotional attacks. It was Ethan, however, who seemed most resilient. His final selfless act had left so little room for regret in his soul that the waves of despair seemed to break against him, finding few cracks to seep into. Through what felt like an eternity, they saw it. The psychic storm was most violent ahead of them. The shades were no longer a disorganized mob but a swirling vortex, a hurricane of spirits circling a single point. The very center of the vortex was a clearing, and in that clearing stood the beacon. It was not a monster or a demon. It was the soul of a young woman, perhaps no older than 20. She was kneeling on the gray ground, her form glowing with a sickly, feverish light. Spectral tears streamed down her face as she clutched at her chest, lost in a memory of profound, all-consuming grief. She was the amplifier, her personal, tragic regret acting as a perfect lens, focusing the insidious whisper from its unknown source and broadcasting it across the entire plane. "We can't fight our way through that," Eva stated, observing the solid wall of frenzied shades that surrounded the clearing. "This isn't a battle for territory. It's a battle for a single soul." Anonna nodded in agreement. "Force will only make it worse. Her grief is the fulcrum. Must be treated. Healed." They all looked at Ethan. He was the one who had made the ultimate sacrifice, not out of duty or for glory, but out of simple, profound empathy. He was the antithesis of the selfish desire to undo the past that was fueling this chaos. "It has to be you," Eva said, her voice grim but certain. "You have to reach her. You have to get through that wall of despair and remind her what she has forgotten." Ethan looked at the swirling vortex of tormented spirits, then at the weeping girl at its heart. He felt no fear, only a deep and aching pity. This was just another kind of fire, and there was someone trapped inside. He took a deep breath, meeting Eva's gaze with a determined nod. Then, alone, he stepped forward, leaving the fragile safety of his companions. He walked toward the storm of ghosts, his own steady soul the only shield he had. The shades immediately turned on him, their collective anguish rising to a deafening psychic scream. The vortex closed in behind him, swallowing him whole, cutting him off from the others. He was now alone in the heart of the sorrow. The moment Ethan stepped into the vortex, the universe contracted to a single point of overwhelming psychic noise. The generalized anguish of the asphodel fields was gone, replaced by a single piercing scream of pure, undiluted regret. The shades swirled around him, a cyclone of spectral forms, their faces contorted in a shared agony that was not their own. They were merely echoes, amplifiers for the tormented soul at the storm's eye. Then the world dissolved. Ethan was no longer in the gray plains of the underworld. He was in a small, cluttered apartment, the air thick with the bitter scent of a recent argument. Sunlight streamed through a dusty window, illuminating floating dust motes and the angry, tear-streaked face of a young woman. Her name was Lila. Ethan knew this not because he was told, but because he was now inside her memory, feeling what she felt. He felt her heart hammering in her chest, a furious rhythm of anger and hurt. He saw through her eyes as she looked at her older brother Jason, whose face was a mask of frustration. Their words, sharp and cruel, still echoed in the room. An eviction notice was on the coffee table, the catalyst for the fight. "I can't believe you did this again, Jason," she screamed, her voice raw. "You gambled away the rent money. Again. I'm done. I'm done covering for you. I'm done with you. Lila, please, I can fix it," he pleaded, his own voice desperate. "No," she spat, grabbing her car keys from a hook by the door. "I hope you rot in this place." It was a horrible, unforgivable thing to say, and the moment the words left her mouth, a part of her wanted to snatch them back. But pride, stubborn and powerful, kept her moving. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her, the finality of the sound a hammer blow to her own heart. The memory was so vivid Ethan could feel the cold metal of the doorknob and the splintering vibration of the slam. Next, he was behind the wheel of a cheap sedan, the engine roaring as she drove too fast, tears blurring the road ahead. The memory was a chaotic storm of sensations, the squeal of the tires, the blare of an angry horn, the suffocating feeling of her own sobs. And beneath it all, the desperate, clawing need to turn around, to go back, to erase the last 10 minutes. To hug her brother and tell him they would figure it out like they always did. It was in that moment of distraction that a truck ran a red light. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass, twisting metal, and a single blinding flash of light. Her final thought, the one that echoed into eternity, was not of fear, not of her own life ending. It was a single agonized word: Jason. Ethan was thrown back into his own consciousness, staggering in the eye of the psychic storm. The memory had been as real as his own. Before him knelt Lila, endlessly reliving that final, horrifying moment. He could now hear the whisper clearly, a serpentine voice coiled around her grief. "You can go back," it hissed, a promise of pure poison. "He's waiting for you. The words can be unsaid. Car can be turned around. You just have to want it enough. Reject this ending. Refuse this reality. Wake up." Lila wept, her hands clutching at her head. "I want to go back," she sobbed. "Please, just let me go back." She was the perfect beacon, her powerful, focused regret an open channel for the chaos. Ethan knew he couldn't break this cycle with force. Logic would be meaningless. He had to enter her pain with her. He knelt in the gray dust in front of her, the swirling shades a blur in his periphery. "Lila," he said, his voice soft but clear over the psychic din. She didn't look up. "I know," he continued. "I felt it. The fight. Car. You loved him. That got through." Her sobbing hitched. "The things we say in anger, they leave the deepest scars," Ethan said, letting his own memories surface. "I remember a fight with my own father. I was young, arrogant. I told him he didn't understand my life, that his advice was worthless. I left and didn't speak to him for a month. He was just trying to help. The look on his face when I said that, I never forgot it. We made up eventually. But if I had died that day, that would have been my storm, Lila. That would have been my unending regret." He wasn't lecturing her. He was sharing a wound. He was showing her that her pain, while immense, was not unique. It was a human pain, a scar left by a life that was lived with all its messy, imperfect love. The whisper is lying to you, he said gently. It's feeding on your pain. It's telling you to change the past, but no one can do that. It's the one law no one can break. But the love you feel for your brother, the love that's causing you all this grief, that's real. That's the part you can hold on to. Don't let your regret be a prison. Let it be a testament to how much you loved him. Slowly, shakily, Lila raised her head. Her eyes, filled with an eternity of sorrow, focused on Ethan for the first time. She saw not a judge or a guard, but a fellow soul who understood. The seductive hiss of the whisper grew frantic in her mind, urging her to turn away, to sink back into her grief. But Ethan's voice was an anchor of calm acceptance. Your story is over, Lila, he said, his voice full of a compassion that could only be earned through sacrifice. It had a tragic ending, but it was your story. It mattered. It's time to let it be written. It's time to be at peace. He extended his hand. For a long moment, she just looked at it, her spectral form flickering between the feverish glow of the beacon and the calm, soft light of a resting soul. The entire field of asphodel seemed to hold its breath. With a final, shuddering sob that was not of grief, but of release, she took his hand. The moment she did, the feverish light died. The psychic scream cut to silence. The vortex of shades collapsed, the energy that had bound them together suddenly gone. They dissipated, returning to their placid, listless wandering, the false hope now extinguished. The storm was over. Eva, Marcus, and Anonna rushed to Ethan's side. They saw him helping the now serene soul of Lila to her feet. Their first mission was a success. But as Eva looked out over the now quiet but still gray and desolate fields, her expression was anything but triumphant. We put out the fire in this one house, she said grimly, looking at Ethan. But the arsonist is still out there, with a world of fuel to burn. This was a symptom. We haven't even begun to touch the disease. The journey back to the Hall of Judgment was surreal. The psychic storm had broken, and the oppressive, agitating hum was gone. In its place was the familiar, profound silence of the asphodel fields. The shades had returned to their placid, aimless wandering, the brief, false hope utterly extinguished from their consciousness. Leading the now serene soul of Lila, Ethan and the others walked not as soldiers returning from a battlefield, but as physicians leaving a quarantined ward. They had treated a symptom, but the disease remained. Upon their arrival at the Great Hall, it was clear their success had been felt. The chaotic energy had subsided, and the Guardians had restored a semblance of order among the waiting souls. King Hades was still on his throne, but the immense, world-bending strain on his features had eased. He looked less like a breaking dam and more like a mountain that had weathered a terrible storm. He was exhausted, but he was unbroken. His stormy gray eyes immediately found the small group and the calm soul of Lila. He rose from his throne, a rare and momentous act, and descended the obsidian steps. He stopped before Lila, his towering form casting a long shadow over her. He did not look at her with anger or judgment for the chaos she had caused, but with a quiet, solemn compassion. Your grief was made into a weapon against you, he said, his voice a low rumble. That is an injustice. Go now. Find the peace you were denied. He gestured, and a gentle guide, much like Hypnos, appeared from the shadows to lead Lila away toward a place of quiet rest. Hades then turned his full attention to the heroes from Elysium. Report, he commanded, his voice once again that of a king. Eva stepped forward, offering a crisp and concise account of the mission, detailing the nature of the psychic vortex and the emotional miasma. Then it was Ethan's turn. He described his experience inside the storm, the vividness of Lila's memory, and the insidious personal nature of the whisper. It didn't just promise escape, Ethan explained. It promised to undo a specific moment, defines the deepest splinter of regret in a soul, and promises to remove it. It's a lie tailored to the individual. Hades listened, his expression grim. A weaponized what if? More dangerous than any blade. He ascended back to his throne, steepling his long fingers. You have cut the head off a weed, but its roots are still deep in my soil. And I do not yet know who the gardener is. What is your counsel, General Rostova? You have fought wars of insurgency. This is no different. All eyes turned to Eva. She met the king's gaze without flinching, a strategist addressing her commander. My king, your instincts are to reinforce your borders, to strengthen the walls of Tartarus and to impose stricter order on the plains. That is the thinking of a warden. I am a warden, Hades stated flatly. Yes, Eva agreed. But you must now also be a general. And a general knows that a purely defensive war against an ideological enemy is a losing war. The Whisper isn't trying to break into your kingdom. It's trying to incite a revolution from within. We cannot win by simply building higher walls. What do you propose? Hades asked, a flicker of interest in his weary eyes. We go on the offensive, Eva declared. We must understand our enemy's strategy. They targeted Asphodel first. Why? Because it was the perfect testing ground. Millions of souls with a baseline of dissatisfaction. It was kindling. Now that they have tested their weapon, they will move to a new target. Not your strongest point like Tartarus, but your most volatile. The newly dead, Anonna added, her physician's mind seeing the diagnosis. The souls just arriving on the banks of the Styx. They are still raw, still connected to their mortal lives, confused and terrified. They are not yet settled. They are emotionally vulnerable and ripe for the Whisper's poison. Finn nodded, remembering his own arrival. The chaos Sharon is facing. It's not just a backlog. It's the next front line. A grim understanding settled over the hall. The enemy was intercepting souls at their weakest moment, corrupting the very beginning of the afterlife process. Hades considered their words, his ancient mind weighing the strategic implications. He looked at Eva with a newfound respect. He was a being of eternal law, of static, unchangeable order. She was a creature of conflict, of fluid tactics and adaptation. He had the power, she had the strategy. You are right, the king conceded, the admission costing his pride nothing, for the survival of his realm was paramount. A defensive posture is insufficient. We must meet this threat where it emerges. He could not go himself. His will was the anchor that held the entire underworld together. Leaving his throne now would be catastrophic. But I can lend you my authority. He raised a hand, and a dark, ornate lantern materialized in the air before them. It was wrought from Stygian iron, and within its glass panes swirled a captured piece of the underworld's perpetual twilight. This is a beacon of order, Hades explained. Its light does not illuminate, clarifies, irradiates my law. Within its aura, the lies of the Whisper will find it harder to take root, and the minds of the dead will be shielded from the worst of the chaos. Take it. Ethan stepped forward and took the lantern. It was cool to the touch and hummed with a deep, resonant power. Go to the shores of the Styx, Hades commanded, his voice now filled with a renewed, cold fury. Help Sharon restore the crossing. Protect the new arrivals. But more importantly, gather intelligence. Learn how the Whisper is reaching them. Find its signature, its method of delivery. I cannot fight a shadow. Find me its shape. The mission was clear. They were no longer a reaction force. They were an expeditionary unit, moving to the very edge of the kingdom to confront the enemy at the source of its incursion. Armed with the king's authority, the heroes of Elysium turned, ready to face the turbulent shores of the afterlife's beginning. The journey from the heart of the kingdom to its outermost border was a descent into escalating chaos. As the heroes moved further from the stabilizing presence of Hades' throne, the very air grew more agitated. They passed lost, terrified souls wandering in the gloom, shades who had arrived but were too consumed by fear and confusion to find their way to the Hall of Judgment. The low hum of anxiety that had once been a whisper in Elysium was now a constant, grating thrum that vibrated in their very bones. They arrived at the shores of the river Styx, and the scene before them was one of utter pandemonium. Ethan's own arrival here had been a silent, solemn, and orderly affair. What he saw now was a sprawling, panicked mob of the newly dead. These were not the placid, gray shades of Asphodel. These souls were still vibrant, blazing with the raw, unprocessed emotions of their final moments. The terror of a car crash victim, the burning rage of a soldier fallen in battle, the bottomless grief of a mother who had left her children behind. Instead of a silent queue, thousands of spirits churned in a chaotic mass, their forms flickering and indistinct. The air was filled with a cacophony of wails, angry shouts, and desperate, nonsensical pleas. And weaving through it all, far more powerful and immediate than it had been in the deep fields, was the whisper. Here, on the raw edge of the afterlife, it was a chorus of insidious lies. It was a mistake. You can go back. Your body is still warm. Don't let them take you. fight it. Your life is yours. They're waiting for you. Just turn around. It's not too late. Some souls stood mesmerized, their eyes glazed over as they listened to the false promises. Others, consumed by the lies, were actively trying to claw their way back from the river, their hands passing through the misty veil that separated the living from the dead. In the midst of this chaos stood the ancient ferryman. Sharon was a being of immense primordial power, but he was a creature of routine, of a single sacred task. He was not equipped for a riot. His skeletal form was rigid with fury, his skiff rocking dangerously as a few desperate souls tried to storm it. He pulled his boat with angry, powerful thrusts, trying to keep the mob at bay, a low growl of pure frustration emanating from the shadows of his cowl. "This is the front line," Eva stated grimly, her strategic mind assessing the chaotic battlefield. "Anonna, Marcus, get ready. Ethan, the beacon." Ethan raised the beacon of order. He focused his will, and the captured twilight within the lantern flared to life. A wave of cool, calm energy rolled out from it, creating a circle of perhaps 100 yards in diameter. Within this circle, the maddening chorus of the whisper was dampened to a faint, distant hiss. The air cleared of the psychic static. The most frenzied cries quieted, and dozens of souls stopped their frantic struggling, blinking in confusion as a moment of clarity washed over them. "Now," Eva commanded. "Marcus with me. We create a perimeter. A single point of entry. We restore the queue." Marcus, a figure of absolute, unwavering authority, strode to the edge of the light. "You will form a line," he bellowed, his centurion's voice, honed to command legions, cutting through the remaining noise. "Order. There will be order." Miraculously, a few souls, desperate for any kind of certainty, obeyed, forming a ragged line behind him. While Eva and Marcus imposed structure, Anonna moved into the crowd like a battlefield medic. She went to the ones still trembling on the edge of the light, those most afflicted by the whisper. "It's okay," she'd say to one, a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident. "The race is over. It's time to rest." To another, a woman weeping for her husband, she'd offer a gentle truth. "He can't hear you anymore. But your love, that is a memory you will keep. Don't let the lie poison it." She was a spiritual anchor, grounding them in the undeniable reality of their new existence. As they worked, Ethan focused on his own task, gathering intelligence. He held the beacon high, his senses attuned to the whisper's lingering energy. He began to notice a pattern. The souls most resistant to the lantern's calming light, the ones most consumed by the whisper, all shared a common trait, a faint silvery thread of energy that seemed tethered to them. The thread was barely visible, and it stretched back across the churning black water of the Styx, back toward the world of the living. It was the first real clue they had. The infection wasn't originating in the underworld. It was attaching itself to souls as they died. Just as a semblance of order began to take hold, a new wave of chaos erupted from the heart of the mob. A soul, fresher than the rest, blazed with a furious crimson light. In life, he had been a violent, hate-filled man, a leader of a brutal street gang who had died in a hail of gunfire. He was not consumed by grief or regret, but by pure, incandescent rage. The whisper had found its perfect champion. "Don't listen to them," the rage-filled soul roared, his voice amplified by the whisper's power. He had become a new, temporary beacon. "They're the jailers. He's lying to you." He pointed a spectral finger at Sharon. "That boat isn't a passage. It's a cage. We can fight. We can go back. Take the boat. Kill the ferryman. Let's go home." His rage was infectious, spread through the panicked crowd like wildfire, overriding the lantern's calming influence. Dozens, then hundreds, of souls turned their terror into fury. The ragged queue dissolved as the mob, now rallied by their new violent leader, turned as one. They surged forward, a tidal wave of angry spirits, their target the small island of order the heroes had created, their goal the destruction of Sharon and the capture of his ferry. Their mission of control had just become a desperate defense. The wave of furious spirits crashed against their small island of order. The beacon of order's calming light flickered, overwhelmed by the sheer, focused force of the mob's rage, a psychic battering ram aimed directly at them. The leader, the soul Ethan mentally dubbed Rico, was a blazing inferno of hatred, his raw power fueling the assault. "Hold the line. Eva's voice cut through the chaos, not a shout but a sharp tactical command. This is not a physical attack. They are trying to overwhelm us with their rage. Do not let it become your own. Marcus, you are the wall. Anonna, disrupt their flanks. Then focus the beacon. Target their leader. Marcus planted his feet, his form becoming as immovable as a mountain. The first wave of enraged souls hit him, and though they passed through his spectral form, their psychic rage impacted him like a physical blow. He grunted, his own disciplined mind a shield against the onslaught. He was an anchor of pure, unshakable duty in a sea of emotional chaos. To his sides, Anonna worked to unravel the mob's unity. She closed her eyes and projected her own thoughts into the swirling crowd, not of peace, but of confusion. She didn't have the power to stop them, but she could sow discord. A soul burning with the desire for revenge would suddenly be struck by a pang of doubt. A spirit screaming for a return to life would be hit with the chillingly logical question, to what? A broken body? A prison cell? She was a saboteur in a war of the mind. Following Eva's command, Ethan gripped the lantern, the Stygian iron cool and steady in his hands. He poured all of his concentration into it, focusing the twilight glow into a single, concentrated beam of energy. It was not a destructive laser, but a ray of pure, clarifying order. He aimed it directly at Rico. The gang leader recoiled as if struck, the beam disrupting the chaotic energy that surrounded him, the whisper's influence momentarily faltering. But there were too many. For every soul Anonna managed to confuse, 10 more surged forward. Marcus's form began to flicker under the immense pressure. The heroes were being pushed back, their small circle of light shrinking under the tide of fury. Just as their line was about to break, a sound echoed across the shore that was deeper and more ancient than any thunder. Gong. It was Sharon. He had struck the floor of his skiff with the end of his great pole. The sound was not wood on wood. It was the sound of a primordial law being struck, a note of absolute finality that silenced every raging spirit. In response to the sound, the river Styx itself rose. The churning black water, the very essence of the boundary between life and death, erupted into 2 towering liquid walls on either side of Charon's boat. He stood between them, no longer a weary ferryman but a grim, terrible god of passage. Tendrils of black water like living arms lashed out from the waves. They bypassed the heroes and struck the front ranks of the mob. The spirits seized by the water did not scream. Their rage was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, absolute understanding of their own powerlessness. They were dragged back, absorbed into the river's dark current. Sharon stood silhouetted against the impossible display of power, and for the first time he spoke a full sentence. His voice was the sound of continents grinding together, a voice of immense age and unforgiving certainty. "The toll will be paid," the voice boomed, not with anger, but with the simple declarative force of a cosmic law. "The passage will be made. There is no other path. This is the law." The effect was devastating. The mob's charge halted. The absolute authority in Charon's voice and the terrifying power of his river shattered their collective rage, replacing it with the primal fear of a power they could not fight. In that moment of hesitation, Ethan pressed his advantage. Rico, the beacon, was now isolated, his power source, the mob's fury, cut off. He was still being bombarded by the beacon of order. His crimson glow began to sputter. "Your fight is over, Rico." Ethan's voice rang out, not with the empathy he had shown Lila, but with the cold, hard authority of the law Sharon had just invoked. "Your rage is meaningless here. Died with your body. You have one path forward. Accept it." The whisper shrieked in Rico's mind, but it was drowned out by the authority of the ferryman and the clarity of the beacon. With a final agonized snarl, the crimson light around Rico imploded, the violent energy dissipating into the gloom. The whisper's hold was broken. He collapsed, no longer a demagogue of the damned, but just another lost and confused soul. With their leader gone and their charge broken, the mob dissolved back into a terrified, disorganized crowd. Sharon let the walls of water subside, the Styx returning to its turbulent state. From the deep, impenetrable shadow of his cowl, he gave the heroes a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a sign of respect from one ancient guardian to another. An alliance had been forged in the crucible of battle. The immediate assault was over. They had held the line. But as the adrenaline of the conflict faded, a chilling realization took its place. Eva Rostova looked from the now subdued crowd to the dark river, her strategist's mind already 5 steps ahead. "They're adapting," she said, her voice low and grim. "The whisper is no longer just preying on sorrow. It's weaponizing rage. It's just tested a new form of attack. They know we're here now and they know what we can do. The next assault, it will be planned. And it will be worse." The immediate aftermath of the battle was a tense, fragile peace. The rage-fueled riot had been broken, but the air on the shores of the Styx was still thick with fear and confusion. Under the steady, calming glow of the beacon of order, the heroes worked alongside Sharon to restore the natural process. Marcus's commanding presence formed the terrified souls into a semblance of a queue, while Anonna moved among them, a beacon of reassurance in her own right, her calm words a balm on their raw, spiritual wounds. Eva Rostova, her mind already processing the battle's tactical implications, approached the silent, imposing figure of the ferryman. "Your intervention was timely, Lord Sharon," she said, her tone one of professional respect. "We are in your debt." From the deep, impenetrable shadow of his cowl, a low, grinding voice emerged, like stones scraping together in a deep cave. "The law was broken. I enforced it. It is my function." He paused, then turned his unseen gaze toward the churning black water. "But this is new. I have ferried the dead since the beginning. I know their sorrows, their fears. This rage, it is foreign. It is a graft upon the soul." Ethan, holding the beacon steady, moved closer. "The silvery threads we saw, they seem connected to it." "They are," Sharon confirmed, his voice heavy with ancient knowledge. "I have seen them before, but they were faint, rare. Now nearly every soul bears one. They are brighter, stronger. They vibrate with a dissonant song. A song of rebellion. Does not belong to this realm. It is an echo from the world you left behind." Confirmation sent a chill through Ethan. The enemy wasn't just in the underworld. It had its hooks in the mortal realm itself, poisoning souls at the very moment of their death. "This changes the nature of the war," Eva said, her face grim. She knew a report had to be made immediately. "Marcus, Anonna, can you hold this position?" Marcus gave a curt, affirmative nod, his hand resting on the hilt of his spectral gladius. "We will maintain the order," he stated simply. Eva turned to Ethan. "Come. King must know. We are no longer fighting a rebellion, we are fighting an invasion." Their return journey to the Hall of Judgment was swift. They stood once more before the Black Diamond Throne, the great hall still humming with a tense but controlled energy. Hades's gaze fell upon them, and he knew instantly that the situation had evolved. Eva delivered her report with cold military precision. The success of the beacon, the weaponization of a soul's rage, Karen's decisive intervention, and finally, the ferryman's confirmation of the silvery threads originating from the mortal world. With each word, the atmosphere in the hall grew colder. Hades did not move, but his anger was a palpable force, a drop in temperature, a shadow that seemed to deepen in every corner. He was a king whose borders were absolute. The idea of an external power reaching into the mortal world to tag souls before they were even his to judge was the ultimate transgression. It was a violation of the most ancient and sacred of laws. "They are infecting them at the source." Hades's voice was a low, dangerous whisper, filled with a cold fury that was far more terrifying than any shout. "This is not merely an attack on my realm. It is an attack on the very fabric of life and death. An attempt to unravel the great design. An enemy that can operate in the mortal realm is outside our reach," Eva stated, cutting to the strategic heart of the problem. "We need intelligence from beyond your borders, my king." Hades was silent for a long moment, the weight of the predicament settling upon him. He, the master of the underworld, the solitary king, was isolated. His power was absolute here, but he was blind to the world above. His brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, were unreliable, driven by ego and whimsy. He could not trust them with a matter of such delicacy. But he was not without options. There were others who served the cosmos itself, not the whims of a single god. "You are correct, General," Hades finally said, his voice resonating with a reluctant decision. "I require a messenger. An observer who can walk between the worlds unseen." He looked at Ethan, then at Eva. "An agent who serves the system, not the politics of Olympus." He stood, descending the steps of his throne once more. He walked to the center of the hall, the vast obsidian floor reflecting his dark, regal form. He raised his hands, and the shadows in the hall deepened, flowing towards him, coalescing around him like a living cloak. He was gathering his will, his very essence as one of the three great kings. "There is one who shares the burden of our work," Hades intoned, his voice taking on the quality of a formal incantation. "One whose function is tied to the sanctity of the soul's journey. He serves my brother, but his duty is to the road itself, and that road is under attack." He closed his eyes, and a wave of pure, silent power erupted from him. It was not a sound, but a command of shadow and finality. It was a summons, a dark pulse sent out from the heart of the underworld, traveling up through the veil of worlds across the mortal plane, seeking a single specific entity. It was a message that carried the full, undeniable authority of the King of the Dead. The wave of power dissipated, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Hades returned to his throne, the effort having cost him nothing physically, but the strategic and political price was yet to be determined. He, Eva, and Ethan waited in the tense, quiet hall. "I have summoned the psychopomp," Hades stated, his stormy eyes fixed on the entrance to his hall. "The Herald of Olympus, the Guide of Souls." A faint golden light began to flicker at the far end of the hall, a light utterly alien to this realm of shadows and silver. "Now," the King of the Underworld murmured, a grim note of anticipation in his voice, "we see if Hermes, the messenger, still honors the sanctity of the road all souls must travel." The summons sent by Hades was a command of pure shadow, a silent, irresistible call. The response was its absolute opposite. A pinpoint of golden light appeared at the far end of the great hall, a light as warm and vibrant as a summer sunrise, utterly alien to this realm of perpetual twilight. The light expanded, not with a solemn hum, but with a sound like rushing wind and distant, joyful laughter. In a blur of motion that defied the static, somber nature of the underworld, a figure resolved from the light. He was youthful and athletic, clad in a simple white tunic that seemed to shimmer with its own luminescence. Winged sandals were laced around his ankles, and in his hand he carried the caduceus, a staff entwined with two serene living serpents. A traveler's cap was perched jauntily on his curly, sun-streaked hair, and his eyes, a brilliant electric blue, sparkled with an irrepressible energy and a hint of mischief. It was Hermes, herald of the gods, patron of travelers, merchants, and thieves. His very presence changed the atmosphere of the hall. The heavy, silent air seemed to crackle and thin, charged with the energy of life, speed, and commerce. He was a lightning strike in a quiet, forgotten tomb. He strode forward, his steps light and soundless, a wide, easy grin on his face. "Uncle," he said, his voice bright and melodic, a stark contrast to the underworld's rumbling baritones. "It's been an age. You really must get out more. This unrelenting gloom does nothing for your complexion. A bit of sun, a sea breeze, it would do you a world of good." Hades, seated on his throne, remained as still and silent as a mountain, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "I did not summon you for social pleasantries, nephew." The king's voice was flat, cutting through Hermes's breezy tone like a shard of obsidian. "Nor for advice on my decor." Hermes's grin didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened, taking in the scene, the king's barely concealed tension, the presence of the two heroic souls, Eva and Ethan, who did not belong in this hall. "No, I suppose you didn't," he conceded, his demeanor shifting from casual traveler to keen-eyed observer. "A summons this strong, sent from the very heart of your throne, the system must be in serious trouble. So what is it? Did Cerberus run off? Did you misplace a titan? Worse." Eva Rostova stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative. She and Hades quickly and concisely briefed the messenger god. They spoke of the whisper, the psychic infection of the dead, the weaponized rage, and most critically, Charon's observation of the silvery threads, the evidence of an external power tampering with souls at the very moment of their death. As he listened, Hermes's light-hearted facade melted away completely. The mischievous sparkle in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard focus. He was not just the god of merchants. He was the psychopomp, the sacred guide of souls. The road the dead traveled was his domain, his personal, sacred responsibility. The idea of souls being hijacked or corrupted before they even reached his care was not just a problem, it was a profound, personal insult. "The road has become noisy," Hermes said, his voice losing its melodic quality, becoming tight and serious. 4 months now. A dissonant static clinging to the newly dead. I thought it was the usual mortal grief, but it's grown stronger, more organized. He looked at Hades, a new understanding between them. You're right. This isn't random chaos. This is an attack on the journey itself. This infection originates in the mortal world, Hades stated. What have you seen up there? Hermes began to pace, his quick, energetic movements a strange sight on the static obsidian floor. Cults, he said, the word dripping with distaste. Small ones at first, but they're growing. Popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. They preach a doctrine of rebellion against fate. They call it the Great Reversal or the Unmaking. They promise their followers that death is not a wall, but a door that can be forced back open. Finn felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This was the source of the whisper. They perform rituals, Hermes continued, stopping to meet Hades' gaze. At places of great mortal sorrow. Hospitals where many have been lost. Old battlefields. The sites of terrible accidents. They are harvesting the emotional residue, the grief and the rage. And I believe they are using it to weave those threads you've seen, tagging the souls of the dying for their master. Here it was. First tangible link. An active, organized enemy in the world of the living working to destabilize the world of the dead. I cannot leave this throne, Hades said, the words a statement of fact, not a complaint. And these heroes cannot walk again in the world of the living. But I can, Hermes finished for him, his expression now one of grim determination. An uneasy, unspoken alliance was forged in that moment. The grim king of the dead, the mortal hero strategist, and the vibrant messenger of the living. 3 completely different worlds, united against a common enemy that sought to destroy them all. You must be our eyes and ears, nephew, Hades commanded. More than that, Hermes retorted, his confidence returning. I'll be your dagger. He spun his caduceus, the serpents hissing softly. Give me a target. Where is the cult strongest? We do not know, Hades admitted. Then I'll start in the place where death and mortal ambition meet in the most spectacular fashion, Hermes said with a wry, mirthless smile. New York City. I'll find the heart of the largest sect. I will identify their leader, the nature of their ritual, and the source of their power. He prepared to depart, his form already beginning to shimmer with golden light. Before he vanished, he paused, a final, serious warning in his eyes as he looked at Hades. Be on your guard, uncle. The energy these cults are wielding, it feels old. Older than us. It has the scent of the primordials, of the ones who came before Olympus. If a power like that is stirring, then my father's golden mountain may soon be in as much danger as your dark kingdom. And with a final blinding flash of golden light and a sound like a whip crack, he was gone. The great hall returned to its deep, oppressive silence. But the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of a command center, waiting for a field report from a war that had just officially spread to a new and far more dangerous front. Hermes' departure left a void in the great hall, a sudden return to the profound, heavy silence that was the underworld's natural state. The vibrant, golden energy he had brought with him vanished, and the familiar gloom settled back in like a shroud. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of eternity, but the tense, waiting quiet of a command center after its sole field agent has been dispatched into enemy territory. Finn and Eva stood before the throne, the weight of their strange new reality pressing in. They were souls of the dead, standing in council with a god, planning a war that spanned worlds. Hades settled back onto his throne, his form seeming to merge with the black diamond. For a long moment, he was perfectly still, his eyes closed. Ethan had the sudden, unnerving sense that the king was not merely resting, but that his consciousness had expanded, flowing out from the hall to touch every corner of his vast, silent kingdom. To be Hades, Ethan realized, was not just to rule. It was to be the realm. He was the central nervous system of the afterlife. He could feel the endless, silent procession of newly arrived souls at the Styx, a river of unending sorrow. He could feel the gray, listless apathy of the millions in Asphodel, a constant low-grade hum of cosmic disappointment. He could feel the contained, monstrous rage of the titans and ancient evils chained in the pit of Tartarus, a pressure like a star threatening to collapse. And in the far distance, he could feel the fragile golden peace of Elysium, a tiny, precious island of light in his ocean of shadow. And now, woven through it all, was the whisper. It was a dissonant, painful static in his mind, a psychic infection that he had to constantly fight, filter, and contain with the force of his own will. The strain was monumental, a burden that would have shattered any lesser being. Hermes' warning about the primordials echoed in the hall. Hades thought of his brothers. Why had he not summoned Zeus? The thought was dismissed as soon as it formed. Zeus was a king of moments, of grand entrances, thunderous proclamations, and fleeting passions. He would not understand the subtle, insidious nature of this threat. He would try to solve it with a volley of lightning bolts, an act of brute force that would be like using a sledgehammer to perform surgery, likely causing more damage than it repaired. No, his prideful, sky-dwelling brother could not be trusted. The irony was bitter. In the greatest crisis his kingdom had ever faced, the king of the Underworld was utterly alone. His eyes opened, and his stormy gray gaze fell upon the two mortal souls before him. "It is a strange fate," he said, his voice a low rumble, "that in a war against the forces of chaos, the most reliable allies I have found are not gods, but two of the dead." It was the closest he had ever come to offering a compliment. Before Eva or Ethan could respond, he gestured to the polished obsidian floor at the foot of his throne. "You have seen the front lines," he said. "Now see the state of the kingdom." The floor shimmered, the black surface becoming a dark, liquid mirror. An image formed. It was the shore of the Styx, viewed from above. They saw Marcus, a pillar of Roman discipline, his presence a bulwark against which the fear of the new arrivals broke. They saw Anonna, moving tirelessly among the crowd, her calm presence a healing balm, mending souls just enough to get them to Charon's ferry. The situation was stable, but the sheer number of souls arriving with the silvery threads of infection was visibly growing. The image shifted, showed a pair of colossal sealed gates of black iron, deep in the gloomiest part of the realm. The gates of Tartarus. The gates were vibrating, and a low, terrible hum emanated from them. "The whisper has reached the pit," Hades explained, his voice grim. "It cannot offer the inmates hope, they are far beyond such concepts. But it can agitate them, fuels their ancient hatred for all forms of order. They now batter their prisons with a renewed fury. Another front I must contain." Finally, the image showed the golden fields of Elysium. The light was still muted, the residents still gathered in anxious groups. Their hard-won peace was now a fragile, conditional thing, a constant, painful reminder of what was at stake in this war. Eva, ever the strategist, looked from the images back to the king, her eyes filled with a new, deeper understanding of the scale of his burden. She asked the question no one else would dare. "How long can you maintain this level of control, my king? You are holding every front simultaneously." Hades' gaze was ancient and immeasurably weary. He gave a rare, brutally honest answer. "This realm is a creature of law. I am the anchor that holds that law in place. As long as I do not break, the kingdom will not fall." He paused. "But the strain is considerable." Just as he finished speaking, a violent tremor shook the entire hall. It was not a physical shaking, but a powerful psychic shockwave that made the very shadows recoil. It was sharp, focused, and it came from a direction that was not north, south, east, or west. It came from outside. Hades shot to his feet, his exhaustion instantly replaced by a cold, sharp alarm. "Hermes," he breathed. He thrust his hands toward the obsidian floor. The images of his kingdom vanished, replaced by a swirling, chaotic vortex of energy as he tried to pierce the veil between worlds. For a moment, a distorted picture flared into existence. They saw a flash of brilliant golden light, Hermes in motion. It was battling against a swirl of sickly, violet-black energy, the unmistakable signature of a dark ritual. In the heart of the dark energy, for a split second, they saw the silhouette of a tall, menacing figure, wreathed in shadows and wielding a jagged obsidian knife. Before they could see more, the image shattered into 1,000 pieces, the connection severed violently. Hades' face was a mask of cold, controlled fury, his eyes blazing like a winter storm. He stared at the now blank floor, the afterimage of the conflict burned into his mind. "He has found them," the king of the dead declared, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised retribution. "And the enemy is fighting back." The world Hermes exploded into was a symphony of chaos, but it was a living, breathing chaos utterly different from the creeping disease in the underworld. He stood invisible on a Times Square billboard, the neon light washing over him as he opened his divine senses. The roar of a million lives slammed into him. The honking of taxis, the sizzle of street vendor hot dogs, the cacophony of a dozen different languages, and beneath it all, the relentless, surging tide of mortal thoughts, ambition, love, greed, and a deep, pervasive anxiety. It was the vibrant, messy, beautiful pulse of humanity. For a moment, he simply listened, allowing the noise of the world to wash over him, recalibrating his senses. Then he began to filter it, searching for the one sound that did not belong. He pushed past the everyday static and listened for the dissonant song, the psychic whisper. It was faint here, mostly drowned out by the sheer vitality of the living, but it was present. A subtle, sickly undertone like a single sour note in a grand orchestra. He pinpointed its direction and launched himself into the sky, a streak of unseen golden light moving faster than any mortal eye could follow. He shot through the canyons of glass and steel, the city a blur beneath him. The signal led him away from the tourist-filled heart of the city, towards the cold, imposing towers of the financial district. The dissonant song grew stronger here, its notes of rebellion against fate resonating with the cutthroat ambition that fueled this part of the world. His destination was not a dark, hidden crypt, but the sleekest, newest skyscraper on the skyline, a monument of dark glass and polished steel called the Anonna Tower. The source of the infection was coming from the penthouse suite. Hiding in plain sight, Hermes phased through the wall, bypassing state-of-the-art security systems as if they were cobwebs. He found himself in a luxurious, minimalist space. There were no robed fanatics or bloody altars. Instead, dozens of New York's elite, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, art dealers, sat in rapt attention. They were dressed in designer clothes, listening to a man who stood before them, a man whose charisma was a palpable force. He was tall and handsome, with a voice that was both soothing and commanding. He spoke of transcending mortal limits, of personal sovereignty over one's own destiny, of death as not an end but a correctable error in the cosmic code. It was a poisonous doctrine, wrapped in the appealing language of self-help and empowerment. But this was just the lecture hall. The ritual, the true source of the power, was elsewhere. Hermes followed the psychic energy upwards, phasing through ceilings until he emerged onto the skyscraper's rooftop. The wind whipped around him, but the scene was one of intense, focused calm. A dozen of the most devoted followers stood in a circle, their voices a low, monotonous chant. The center of the circle, an old, frail man lay on a simple white cot. He was dying, his breath coming in shallow rasps. But his eyes were wide with ecstatic belief. He was a willing participant. Standing over him was the charismatic leader from downstairs. Here, in the heart of his power, his true nature was visible. A faint, violet-black aura of corrupt energy clung to him. In his hand, he held a knife, its blade a piece of jagged, unholy obsidian that seemed to drink the city lights. This was the man from Hades's vision. This was Kalen. He was not using the knife to kill the man. Life was already doing that for him. He was using it as a psychic focusing tool. As the old man breathed his last, his soul began to detach from his body. Kalen raised the knife, and with the focused, chanting will of his followers, he gathered the raw energy of that final moment, the pain, the fear, the release, and began to weave it into a silvery thread. He was attaching the whisper, branding the soul with the lie of rebellion before it could even begin its journey. Hermes could wait no longer. With a cry that was both a battle cry and a note of pure, divine harmony, he revealed himself. He erupted in a blinding flash of golden light, his sudden appearance shattering the cultists' concentration. "The road of the dead is not your playground, mortal," Hermes declared, his voice ringing with the authority of a god. Kalen showed no fear, only a flash of furious annoyance. "The psychopomp," he sneered. "The delivery boy. The gods of order are weak, obsolete. That we will unmake your system." He lunged, not with his body but with his power. A bolt of the violet-black energy shot from the obsidian knife. It was a blast of pure chaos, of anti-existence. Hermes moved in a blur, deflecting the bolt with his caduceus. The impact sent a psychic shockwave out, the tremor that Hades felt deep in the underworld. The battle was one of impossible speed and conflicting forces. Hermes was a blur of golden light, his movements too fast to follow. Kalen was a pillar of dark energy, rooted to the spot, wielding the power of the void. Order against chaos. Creation against the unmaking. Kalen was powerful, fueled by his dark patron and the devotion of his followers. He knew he was outmatched in speed, but this rooftop was his temple. With a guttural cry, he plunged the obsidian knife into the air, not at Hermes but at the fabric of reality itself. A wave of power erupted, severing the psychic connection Hades had to the scene. He was cutting the cord, isolating the battle. Hermes realized his mission was complete. He had the intel, the leader, the method, the power source. This was not the time or place for a decisive battle. With a final explosive burst of divine light that sent the cultists reeling backwards, he disengaged, vaulting off the side of the skyscraper and vanishing into the New York night. He reappeared in the shadows of a cathedral spire miles away, his divine form flickering. The golden light around him was dimmer, frayed at the edges. He had not been physically wounded, but direct contact with that raw, unmaking energy had taken a toll. He looked down at his caduceus. Where it had blocked the blast, the golden staff was now tarnished with a black, creeping corrosion. And he knew something with chilling certainty. The obsidian knife Kalen wielded was not of this world. It wasn't forged. Felt primordial. It was a piece of solidified chaos from the age before the gods. The enemy wasn't just convincing mortals to do their bidding. They were arming them with weapons from the dawn of time. He had a message for Hades. Terrifying, urgent message. And he knew, with every divine instinct he possessed, that the cult would now be hunting him through the mortal world. The spy was now the prey. Hermes rematerialized in the cold, windswept darkness atop the Brooklyn Bridge, the distant lights of the city glittering like a field of fallen stars. He leaned heavily against a steel cable, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The vibrant, boundless energy that was his very essence felt frayed, like a rope stretched to its breaking point. He looked down at his caduceus. Creeping black corrosion from Kalen's chaotic energy was spreading, a dark stain on the divine gold. He, the god of speed and effortless travel, felt a leaden weight in his limbs. The mortal world, once a playground he could traverse in the blink of an eye, now felt vast and hostile. He closed his eyes and extended his senses. It was as he feared. Cultists were hunting him. He could feel their psychic probes sweeping through the city, a network of unseen hounds searching for the scent of his divine light. Even suppressed, his energy was a beacon in the mortal realm. He was the fox, and the hunt had begun. A direct return to the underworld was impossible. If they were tracking him, he could inadvertently lead them to a weak point in the veil between worlds, a hidden entrance that Hades himself might not know. It was a risk he could not take. Flying to Olympus was equally out of the question. His father, Zeus, would respond to this news with thunder and fury, a celestial tantrum that would announce their knowledge to the enemy and escalate the conflict into open cosmic war before they were ready. No. The intelligence he had gathered, the face of Kalen, the nature of the ritual, the terrifying truth of the primordial knife, was for Hades alone. It required the Underworld King's cold, calculating, strategic mind. He was trapped, wounded, and in possession of the most important information in the war. He had to get a message through. But how? Any form of divine communication would be a flare in the dark, a signal for the hunters to converge on his position. Then an idea sparked, a classic piece of hermetic ingenuity. He was a god of trickery, a master of the unconventional. He could not risk traveling the road, but he could send a letter. He just needed a postman who was already scheduled for the journey. He needed a soul. He had to find a dying mortal, one who was not yet tagged by one of the cult's silvery threads. He would entrust his message to this soul, a final secret to be delivered upon arrival. It was a desperate gamble. The message could be lost in the confusion of death, the soul could be intercepted. But it was the only move he had. He cast his senses out again, this time not searching for his enemies, but for the quiet, flickering lights of lives coming to an end. He bypassed the city's hospitals. Kalen's followers would be watching those places like vultures. He ignored the sirens of an ambulance racing to an accident. Tragedy was where they did their best work. He searched for a death that was private, peaceful, and most importantly, unnoticed. He found her in a small, tidy apartment in Queens, the kind of place the modern world overlooks. An old woman lay in her bed, surrounded by towering stacks of books, her breathing as soft and gentle as the turning of a page. Her name was Eleanor, and she had been a librarian. Her life had been one of quiet service, of sharing stories with others. Her soul was calm, luminous, and free of the frantic, desperate regret the whisper preyed upon. She was the perfect messenger. Hermes appeared in her room, not as a radiant god, but as a gentle, comforting presence of soft, warm light. He appeared in the space between heartbeats, in the final sacred moment of transition as her soul untethered itself from her body. Eleanor's soul looked at him not with fear, but with a librarian's calm curiosity. "You're not one of the usual ones," her thoughts communicated, serene and clear. "No," Hermes replied, his voice a gentle whisper in her mind. "I am a guide, but my road is in danger. A great story is in peril, Eleanor, and I need your help to deliver a critical message to the king at the end of all stories." He didn't have time to explain the complexities of the war. He had to show her. He reached out, not touching her, but allowing a flicker of his own divine essence to connect with her soul. He imprinted the message directly onto her spirit, the image of the windy rooftop, the hateful violet energy, the cruel, charismatic face of Kalin, and most importantly, the cold, ancient, and utterly wrong feeling of the obsidian knife. "They are trying to unwrite the ending," Hermes explained. "When you reach the ferryman, simply hold this memory in your mind. The right people will see it. It is your final and most important service." Eleanor, a soul who had spent her life preserving and sharing knowledge, understood. Her soul gave a single, determined nod. The message will be delivered. With a final, peaceful sigh, her soul departed, beginning its journey. Hermes watched her go, a secret message now hidden in the most mundane of packages, an undeclared item slipped through enemy lines. He had done it. His message was on its way. Now he was truly alone, weakened, and trapped. The hunt would only intensify. His role as a spy was over. His new role was that of a survivor. Far below, on the gray, misty shores of the river Styx, Marcus and Anonna were still holding the line. A new soul arrived, an old woman with a remarkably peaceful aura. As she stepped forward to pay the ferryman's toll, Anonna noticed something strange. For a fleeting moment, a faint golden light seemed to shimmer around the old woman's form, a residual warmth that did not belong in the cold reality of death. A message had just arrived. The work on the shores of the Styx had become a grueling, soul-wearying routine. Under the steady, calming glow of the beacon of order, Marcus maintained the fragile queue, his disciplined presence a rock against the endless tide of fear. Anonna moved through the lines of the newly dead, a psychic medic on an eternal battlefield, offering what little comfort she could, grounding the terrified souls long enough for them to take the final journey with Sharon. It was monotonous, emotionally draining, and seemingly infinite. And then, a break in the pattern. An old woman's soul approached the front of the line. In a sea of fear and confusion, her aura was a pool of profound calm. It was this peacefulness that first drew Anonna's attention. But as the soul drew closer, Anonna sensed something else, a faint, almost imperceptible resonance that did not belong. It was a warm, golden shimmer clinging to the edges of the soul's otherwise normal, silvery light. It was an energy signature she had felt only once before, in the Hall of Judgment when Hermes had arrived. "Hold the line," Anonna said quietly to Marcus, her eyes fixed on the old woman. Marcus saw the intense focus on Anonna's face and immediately understood. He stepped forward, his form an impassable barrier, halting the queue's advance and giving Anonna the space she needed. Anonna approached the librarian's soul, her demeanor gentle and non-threatening. "Welcome," she said softly. "You seem at peace. More so than most who arrive here." The soul of Eleanor offered a serene, mental smile. "I lived a long life and read many good books. The ending is just the final chapter." "Your soul carries an echo of a long journey," Anonna probed gently. "And of a guide you met along the way." Eleanor's placid expression became one of intense focus. She was remembering her purpose, the final task given to her. The road is in danger, her thoughts communicated, now laced with an urgent memory that was not her own. A message for the king at the end of all stories. As Eleanor focused on the memory Hermes had imprinted, the images began to bleed into her aura. Anonna saw flashes, chaotic and violent. She reached out and placed a calming hand on the librarian's spectral shoulder, not to pry, but to help her stabilize the message. The full force of the imprint hit her. She was on a windswept rooftop, the lights of a mortal city sprawling below. She felt the whip-crack speed of Hermes, the divine energy thrumming through her. She saw the circle of chanting mortals and the charismatic, hate-filled face of their leader, Kalin. She saw the soul of a dying man being twisted into a weapon. And then she felt it, a cold that was older than death itself. It emanated from the jagged, black knife in Kaelin's hand. It was the feeling of pure, unadulterated anti-existence, a void that sought to unmake everything it touched. The vision ended with the searing pain of that energy striking the caduceus, and a feeling of desperate, urgent retreat. Anonna pulled her hand back, her own soul trembling from the psychic backlash. She, a healer, had just touched a weapon designed to unravel the very fabric of a soul. "Marcus," she breathed, her voice unsteady. "We have a problem." Marcus's hand went to the hilt of his gladius. "What did you see?" "The source," she said, trying to put the terrifying vision into words. "A ritual in the mortal world. They are forging the whisper, attaching it to the dying like a parasite. Their leader, he fought Hermes. And he wields a power that is not of the gods. It is something else. Something wrong." This was intelligence of the highest order, too critical to be relayed by a runner, too complex to be trusted to a second-hand report. "We have to take her to the king. Now." Getting Sharon to deviate from his eternal route was no small feat, but when Marcus explained the situation, appealing to the alliance forged in their battle against Rico's mob, the ancient ferryman understood. The threat to the law was greater than a small breach of protocol. With a low, grinding growl of assent, he allowed Marcus, Anonna, and their precious messenger Eleanor to board his skiff. He pulled the boat not across the Styx, but along its bank, a journey no soul had taken in millennia, back toward the docks that served the Hall of Judgment. Their arrival caused a silent, shocked stir. The guardians of the hall watched, stunned, as two Elysian heroes escorted a common, unjudged soul from the ferryman's boat. It was an unprecedented event. They marched swiftly through the great hall, stopping only when they stood before the throne where Hades and Eva were still in council with Ethan. "My king," Anonna called out, her voice filled with urgency. "A message. From Hermes. It has arrived." Hades' stormy eyes instantly fixed on the librarian's soul. Eva and Ethan watched as the king of the underworld focused his immense, terrifying perception on the unassuming spirit. He did not need Anonna's help. He could read the memory imprinted upon Eleanor's soul as easily as a mortal reads a book. As he absorbed the information, his stony facade finally cracked. His knuckles went white on the arms of his throne. His eternal, weary calm was shattered, replaced by a look of profound, primal shock. For the first time since this war began, the King of the Dead looked not just angry, not just burdened, but shaken. He looked at the mental image of the obsidian knife, and his ancient mind finally gave the terrifying object a name. His voice was a barely audible whisper, but it echoed in the silent hall with the weight of a collapsing mountain. "A shard of the outer dark," Hades breathed, the words tasting like poison. "They are not just fighting with chaos. They are wielding weapons from before creation." A profound and dreadful silence descended upon the Hall of Judgment. The name Hades had whispered, a shard of the outer dark, hung in the air, seeming to absorb all light and sound. It was a name that held the weight of forgotten eons. Eva and Ethan stared at their king, at the being they had come to see as an anchor of absolute, unwavering order. And for the first time, they saw a crack in that certainty, a flicker of an ancient, deep-seated dread in his stormy eyes. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper, yet it sounded like a thunderclap in the stillness. "What is the outer dark?" Hades slowly lowered himself back onto his throne, his movements heavy, as if the knowledge itself was a physical burden. He looked at the two mortal heroes and the soul of the librarian Eleanor, who had delivered the terrible message. He knew he now had to explain the true nature of the war they were fighting. Before this world, before Olympus, before the titans that came before them, there was no before, Hades began, his voice low, taking on the tone of a scholar reciting a forbidden text. There was no time, no space, no life, no death. There was only the chaos. A formless, thoughtless, infinite potential for everything and nothing. A roiling, senseless void. That is the outer dark. He gestured around the great hall at the very structure of his kingdom. This reality, all realities, the mortal world, Olympus, my own realm, is a structure. A great design imposed upon that raw, formless chaos. The first beings of consciousness, the primordials, night, day, earth, sky, they gave it shape. Titans gave it laws. And we, the Olympians, became its governors. Every part of existence, from the turning of a planet to the final beat of a mortal heart, is a thread in a vast, intricate tapestry. A tapestry that gives meaning to a universe that once had none. His gaze became intense, filled with a cold fire. A shard of the outer dark is not mere metal. It is a piece of that original, thoughtless void given form. It is a weapon of anti-existence. It does not kill a body or even a soul. It unmakes. It unravels the threads of a being's story, erasing it from the tapestry as if it had never been. That is why Hermes was so wounded. His very essence, a story of speed and messages, was touched by a power that seeks to end all stories. A horrifying understanding dawned on Eva. And this is the power Kaelin is wielding. He is a conduit, Hades affirmed. A mortal filled with ambition and resentment, a perfect vessel for a power that despises all creation. We are not fighting a rogue god or a demon. Our enemy is a sentient echo of the first chaos itself. The voice that unmakes. Its goal is not to conquer the universe but to dissolve it. To return everything to the silent, mindless void from which it came. Now everything made sense. The whisper wasn't a trick. It was a philosophical weapon designed to make souls reject their place in the great design. Cults weren't just seeking power. They were actively working to unravel the fabric of reality from the mortal world, using the powerful emotions of humanity as their fuel. Eva's strategic mind raced, processing the new, terrifying parameters of the war. "We are no longer fighting an insurgency," she stated, her voice grimly calm. "We are fighting for the continuation of existence itself. And we are losing." Hermes is trapped in the mortal realm, being hunted by assassins armed with soul-destroying weapons. And here we are fighting a defensive battle against an enemy that is growing stronger with every soul it corrupts. Hades gave a slow, solemn nod. Time for secrets and solitary burdens was over. This threat is greater than my kingdom. It is a threat to the entire pantheon, to the great design itself. A deep, cold fury settled on his features. "And they have wounded my herald." A new resolve hardened his expression. Defensive measures were no longer enough. Fortifying the walls against a flood is useless when the enemy's goal is to turn the ocean back into steam. "We cannot fight a weapon of unmaking with swords or spears of the soul," Hades declared, his voice ringing with renewed, albeit grim, purpose. "We cannot fight a power from before creation with the tools of the present. To fight an enemy that unravels stories, we need a weapon made of story itself. We need a weapon of pure, undeniable fate." Finn looked at him, confused. "Where do we find such a weapon?" Hades' gaze turned from them, looking inward toward the deepest, most secret, and most dangerous corner of his own domain. A place even he rarely dared to tread. "There are powers within my realm that are not my subjects," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper of awe and dread. "Ancient neutral beings who serve not me nor Olympus but the design itself. They are the weavers of the tapestry. The authors of every life, mortal and divine." He looked back at his small council, his stormy eyes burning with the light of a desperate, terrible plan. "The voice of chaos seeks to rip the pages from the book of existence," Hades proclaimed. "We must arm ourselves with the book itself. Our next journey is to the loom of destiny. We must seek an audience with the Moirai, the Fates, the three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. To seek them out was madness. They were notoriously unpredictable, their motives inscrutable, their power absolute. They did not grant favors or choose sides. "We will ask for their help," Hades finished, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We will ask the weavers of fate to help us stop the one who seeks to unravel all they have ever woven." The war had just escalated to a cosmic scale. Their new mission was set, a perilous journey to the very heart of destiny, a desperate gamble to ask the impossible of the three beings who held the fate of the universe in their hands. The decision was made. The air in the Hall of Judgment crackled with a new, desperate energy. This was no longer a mission of defense or intelligence gathering. This was a quest, a journey into the mythological heart of the realm to seek an alliance with the very architects of destiny. Hades rose from his throne, his presence commanding absolute attention. He sent a silent, swift summons across his realm. Moments later, Marcus and Anonna arrived from the Styx, their forms materializing in the hall, their faces etched with the strain of their duty. Their small council was now complete. First, Hades turned to the soul of Eleanor, the librarian who had been their unwitting messenger. "Your service to this realm has been greater than any mortal could ever know," the king said. his voice holding a rare note of warmth. "You have earned your reward." With a gentle wave of his hand, a doorway of soft, golden light opened, the peaceful melodies of Elysium drifting through. Eleanor's soul gave a final, grateful nod and passed through, her story finally reaching its peaceful conclusion. With that act of justice complete, Hades turned to his council. "We cannot leave the kingdom undefended," he stated. He spoke a word of command, and the great shadowy forms of his most trusted guardians materialized, taking their posts to reinforce the Styx and the gates of Tartarus. "They will hold the line. But we must be swift." He explained their destination. "The Morai do not reside in a place you can find on a map," he said, his voice low. "Their domain is a nexus of causality, a place that underpins all of time and space. To reach it, we must walk the path of unwritten possibilities." He led them from the Great Hall, not through a gate but to a simple, unadorned wall of black rock. He placed his palm upon it, and the rock dissolved, not into a tunnel but into a shimmering curtain of mist. "Whatever you were, whatever you regret, whatever you long for, leave it behind," he warned. "The path will use it against you. Stay focused on the purpose that unites us. Follow me and do not stray." They stepped through the mist and into a reality that defied all logic. They were in a vast, dark void, but it was not empty. It was filled with an infinite number of faint, shimmering threads that stretched from nothingness to nothingness. Some threads glowed with a brilliant, steady light. Others were thin and frayed, flickering weakly. Knots of threads were tangled together in complex patterns of love, hatred, and obligation. It was the raw material of destiny, and they were walking through it. The path itself was a single, slightly brighter thread under their feet. As they walked, the threads around them began to react to their presence, to resonate with their souls. It was a journey into their own hearts. Marcus, the soldier, suddenly stopped, his face a mask of anguish. To his left, a series of threads glowed a violent crimson. He saw a battle he had lost, a flank that had collapsed. He saw the faces of the men who had died under his command. A vision formed, showing him how a different order, a different choice could have saved them all. The path was tempting him with the ultimate regret of a commander. "Marcus!" Hades' voice cut through the illusion. "A soldier's duty is to the battle he fought, not the one he imagines. Past is written. Look forward." Marcus gritted his teeth, tore his gaze from the vision, and marched on. Next, it was Anonna. The threads around her glowed with a sickly, pale light. She saw the faces of patients she had lost, children she could not save from plagues, mothers she could not heal. Path whispered to her of cures just beyond her grasp, of knowledge she could have obtained that would have saved them. It was the ultimate torture for a healer, the illusion of omnipotence. "Anonna," Hades called. "Your purpose was to mend, not to master death. Death is my domain. Accept your part in the design." With tears in her spectral eyes, she nodded and continued on. Even Eva was not immune. She was confronted with a tapestry of entire civilizations, threads of history she had altered with her strategies. She saw the cities that had flourished under her protection and the empires that had turned to dust before her armies. The path tempted her with the ultimate hubris of the powerful, the belief that she could have controlled it all, achieved her victories without cost or consequence. Her analytical mind fought against the emotional chaos, and she pushed through. Finally, the path tested Ethan. He had little regret to prey on. So instead, it showed him what he had lost. A single, beautiful thread of pure, golden light unspooled beside him. He saw a life of simple, profound happiness, the woman he would have married, the children they would have had, the quiet joy of growing old surrounded by love. It was not a vision of regret, but of a deep, aching longing for a life he had willingly given away. "Ethan!" Hades' voice was sharp. "Every thread tells a story. That one is a long and beautiful tale. Yours is short, but it blazes with the light of selfless honor. Do not disrespect the story you chose to write." Ethan closed his eyes, the vision of his lost future fading, and he took his place back on the path. Hades alone seemed unaffected, a being of pure law walking through a sea of what-ifs. Through what felt like an eternity of this psychological trial, the endless threads began to converge. They arrived in a vast, silent cavern at the heart of existence. The space was empty, save for one object at its center. It was a loom. So ancient it seemed to be made of petrified wood and bone, yet so vast its dimensions were impossible to comprehend. From this loom, every thread of fate in the cosmos originated. And tending it were three figures. They were cloaked and hooded, their forms stooped with age, their faces hidden in absolute shadow. They were the Moirai. Clotho, the spinner, drew the raw material of life from the void. Lachesis, the elater, measured the length of each thread. And Atropos, the inflexible, held a pair of terrifying adamantine shears. Snip. The sound was small, yet it echoed with absolute finality. Somewhere in the universe, a life had just ended. The Fates did not acknowledge the newcomers. They just continued their eternal, implacable work. Hades strode forward, his presence as a great king seeming to diminish in this place of ultimate power. He opened his mouth to make his desperate, universe-altering plea. Before a single word could escape his lips, Atropos, the cutter, ceased her work. She held up her shears, the gesture commanding a silence that was deeper than any before it. Slowly, she turned her hooded head, the void within her cowl seeming to fixate on the king and his companions. Her voice was the sound of dry leaves skittering across a tombstone, a sound of immense age and no emotion. "Helios, king of the below," she rasped. "We have been expecting you." She paused, the silence stretching for an eternity, before adding the final chilling words. "The tapestry unravels. You are late." Atropos' words fell into the silence with the weight of absolute truth. "You are late." The statement was not an accusation, it was a simple, terrifying fact. Hades and his council were not petitioners bringing news. They were tardy actors arriving on a stage where the tragedy was already well underway. The Fates had been watching the tapestry unravel all along. The three ancient sisters, the Moirai, finally turned their collective attention to their visitors. Their movements were slow, ancient, and deliberate. It was Clotho, the spinner, who spoke first. Her voice was a low, steady hum like the sound of an eternal spinning wheel. "The thread is wrong," she rasped, her unseen gaze fixed on some distant abstract concept. "The material drawn from the mortal realm is now tainted. It is brittle. It is infused with the resonance of the outer dark. Cannot be properly spun into the stuff of life. It introduces knots, weaknesses, and frays before the thread has even truly begun." Next, Lachesis, the Elysium, spoke. Her voice was dry and precise, like a measuring rod scraping against stone. "The lengths are being corrupted," she stated. "Threads meant to be long and bright, woven into grand designs, are made short and dull. Threads that should have ended in peace are twisted into violent, abrupt knots of rage and regret. The destinies we measure are being perverted." Finally, Atropos, the cutter, raised her dreadful shears, the adamantine blades gleaming with a cold, final light. Her voice was the rustle of dry parchment, empty of all emotion. "The unraveling accelerates." Hades stepped forward, his regal form seeming diminished before these primordial beings. "You see all this," the king of the Underworld said, his voice strained. "Why have you not acted? Your very purpose is threatened." "We are the weavers, king of the below, not the warriors," Atropos replied, her tone implacable. "We record the story of the universe, we do not write its dialogue. Choices that create the patterns are made by those who live the threads. Tapestry has always recorded the struggle between order and chaos. It is not our place to favor a thread, only to weave its path and mark its end. It was a wall of divine neutrality, an absolute refusal to interfere. But Hades had anticipated this. He chose his words carefully, appealing not to their sense of good or evil, but to their sacred function. "This is not a character in the story seeking advantage," Hades argued, his voice ringing with desperate logic. "This is a fire in the library. A force that seeks not to be woven into the tapestry, but to shatter the loom itself. The voice of chaos does not wish to be a part of your design. It wishes to end the concept of a design altogether. If it succeeds, your work, your purpose, your very existence becomes a forgotten memory in an eternity of mindless nothing." For the first time, the Fates were silent. Hades had not asked them to choose a side in a war. He had asked them to choose between the continuation of their eternal work and its absolute cessation. Clotho's humming stopped. Lachesis' measuring hand grew still. Atropos lowered her shears. "The bargain must be struck," Atropos rasped. "We cannot interfere directly. We cannot give you a sword to slay your enemy. That is not how our power works. But we can reinforce a thread, strengthen a piece of the design to resist the unraveling. Her hooded gaze, a void of pure darkness, swept across the council. Passed over Hades, a god whose thread was too ancient and foundational to be rewoven. Passed over Eva, Marcus, and Anonna, heroes whose stories were already written, their threads woven to their conclusion. Then, her gaze settled on Ethan. "This one," Atropos said, a hint of something akin to interest in her dry voice. "His thread is short, but it burns with the light of a willing sacrifice. His story ended, but its echo, its meaning, is a powerful note of pure order in the cosmic song. He is the conceptual opposite of the selfish unmaking." Eva and Hades both looked at Ethan, a sudden, stunning realization dawning on them. "We offer a choice," Lachesis said. "We can mend this hero's severed thread. Not to return him to life, but to repurpose his soul." "We will weave a new filament," Clotho hummed, "a thread spun not of life, but of pure destiny. And we will graft it onto his essence." Atropos raised her shears. "You will become a champion of the design, Ethan Carter. Your touch, your very presence, will be anathema to the chaos. You will be able to reinforce the story of other souls, to shield them from the unraveling. You will become our antibody against the infection." It was an offer of incredible power, the power to be the ultimate hero, to save existence itself. And then came the price. "But this power comes at a cost," Atropos stated, her voice leaving no room for illusion. "The simple piece of Elysium you have earned will be forfeit. Forever. By accepting this, your story will be permanently entwined with the fate of this realm. When this war is done, your reward will not be rest, but an eternal vigil. You will become a guardian, a warden of the balance. You must sacrifice your peace to preserve the peace of all others." It was the echo of the choice he had made in the fire. Save himself or save others? Rest or duty? Ethan looked at Hades, at Eva, and thought of the perfect, fragile piece of Elysium, and the billions of souls threatened by the silent, unmaking void. There was no real choice to be made. There was only who he was. "I accept," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. "My life was my choice. My death will be my duty." A grim, almost imperceptible nod came from the three ancient sisters. "So it is woven." They converged on Ethan. Clotho reached out, and from her fingertips spun a thread that shimmered with the light of a billion stars, a filament of pure fate. Lachesis took it, measuring a length that was not of time but of purpose. Then Atropos stepped forward. She did not raise her shears to cut. Instead, she used their sharp divine point to deftly, precisely graft the shimmering thread into the very center of Ethan's soul. An explosion of pure energy, silent but overwhelming, erupted through him. For a moment, he was not just Ethan Carter. He was connected to everything. He felt the weaving of the entire tapestry, the birth of stars, the fall of empires, the quiet joys and sorrows of every life that had ever been or ever would be. He was no longer just a soul. He was a living, breathing piece of the great design. The heroes now had their champion. Power of the fates settled within Ethan, not like a storm, but like a deep, quiet ocean filling a previously empty space. The world, which he had always perceived through the five senses of a mortal, and then the muted senses of a soul, now unfolded before him in a new, breathtaking dimension. He could see it. The great tapestry. He saw the shimmering thread of his own soul, no longer severed but rewoven with a filament of starlight, a thread of pure destiny. He looked at his companions and saw their stories. Eva's, a complex cord of steel and shadow. Marcus's, a straight, unwavering line of duty. Anonna's, a gentle braid of countless healed threads. He could feel the entire underworld not as a place but as a vast, intricate pattern. And he could see the infection of the whisper for what it truly was, a corrosive acid, a chaotic energy that sought to fray and dissolve the threads, to unmake the stories that gave them meaning. Their return from the Fates' domain was not a journey but a shift in perception. One moment they were in the silent void of the loom, the next they stood again on the obsidian floor of the Hall of Judgment, the immense power Ethan now wielded humming silently in the air. First priority was clear. "Hermes," Ethan said, his voice now holding a new resonance, a quiet authority that made even Hades listen with renewed attention. "His thread is frayed. The hunters are closing in." Ethan closed his eyes, focusing not on the mortal world but on the tapestry that connected all worlds. He found the thread of the messenger god, a brilliant, hyperactive streak of gold, currently flickering violently, beset on all sides by snarling, tangled threads of violet-black chaos. He could not pull Hermes out of his predicament, but he could intervene. "I cannot build him a bridge," Ethan murmured, concentrating. "But I can reinforce the one he walks upon." He reached out with his will, channeling the power of the Morai that now resided within him. A shimmering wave of pure, concentrated order, a light spun from destiny itself, flowed from him. Traveled not through space, but along the metaphysical pathways of fate, instantly crossing the veil between worlds. In a skyscraper in New York, a hunted god, cornered and weakened, would suddenly feel a surge of divine power, his frayed essence knitting back together, his speed returning, giving him the strength he needed to evade his pursuers and survive. The immediate danger to their agent was averted. With Hermes shielded, they could turn to their own realm. Eva Rostova's eyes burned with a strategist's fire. "We have been on the defensive for too long," she declared, turning to Hades. "We now have a weapon. It's time for a counteroffensive." "What do you propose, General?" Hades asked. "We will perform a great cleansing," Eva said, her plan forming with cold, brilliant clarity. "The enemy's primary weapon is the corruption of souls. Their main point of entry is the shores of the Styx. We will use Ethan's power to purge the Whisper's influence on a massive scale. We will show the voice of chaos that its foothold in this realm is gone. We will force it to retreat and reconsider its strategy." It was a bold, audacious plan, and it was their only move. The entire council returned to the shores of the Styx. The scene was still one of controlled chaos, with Marcus and Anonna bravely holding the line. This time there was a new sense of purpose. Hades and Sharon stood together at the water's edge, their combined primordial power stabilizing the river, their authority creating a bulwark against any further incursions. Marcus and Anonna moved through the vast, terrified crowd, not just containing them, but gathering them, preparing them. Eva stood on a high, shadowy crag, directing the entire operation like a conductor before a symphony. And at the center of it all stood Ethan. He walked to the edge of the assembled throng of thousands upon thousands of lost, frightened, and infected souls. He took a deep breath and unleashed the power within him. It was not a blast of light or a wave of force. It was a wave of pure story. Power of the fates flowed out from him and washed over the assembled dead. And as it touched each soul, it did not heal them, it reminded them. A soldier who died in anger was suddenly filled with the memory of the love for which he fought. A mother who died in grief was reminded of the fierce joy her children had brought her. A businessman who died with regret was reminded of the one honest deal that had made him proud. The power of fate reinforced the integrity of their own completed narratives. It did not erase their pain or their flaws. It validated them as part of their unique, finished story. And against this profound personal truth, the seductive lie of the whisper, the poison of what if, had no power. All across the vast shore, the silvery threads of chaos that clung to the souls sizzled, smoked, and dissolved into nothingness. A collective sigh, a release of millennia of pent-up fear and confusion, swept across the plain. For the first time since the crisis began, the shores of the river Styx were quiet. The souls were no longer a panicked mob, but an orderly, peaceful congregation, ready to complete their journey. Deep in the cosmic void, a psychic presence reeled back in shock. Its primary weapon had been rendered useless. Its foothold in the underworld, so carefully cultivated, had been obliterated in a single, decisive stroke. The voice of chaos, for the first time, felt the sting of a true defeat and began a cold, furious retreat. Back in the Hall of Judgment, the victory was palpable. The oppressive psychic static that had plagued the realm was gone. The air was clear. "You have given my kingdom a future," Hades said, looking at his council, his voice filled with a deep, unprecedented respect. "We have won this battle," Eva cautioned, ever the pragmatist. "But the war is far from over. The enemy will abandon this tactic and forge a new one. Then warfare, perhaps. Or a direct assault on Olympus, as Hermes warned." The final focus of the hall fell on Ethan. He was no longer a firefighter from Chicago or even a hero of Elysium. He was something new. He looked down at his hands, which seemed to shimmer with the faint light of a billion stories yet to be told. He had made his choice. He had sacrificed his peace, and in its place found his true and eternal purpose. He was the champion of the design. Hades looked at him, the king and his champion, their alliance forged in cosmic fire. The librarian's tale is told. "The battle is won," the Lord of the Underworld said, his voice a low, resonant promise of the trials to come. And now, champion, the true war begins.